The events unfold in a distant field where several workers are diligently harvesting crops. Suddenly, one of the workers started shouting Sean's name, expressing his fatigue from the hard work. Young Sean, hearing his father calling him, responded joyfully, feeling relieved. It turned out that the father wanted to share some news with his son, and the work in the field was finished today, and they were heading home. A girl stood nearby, noticing that Bond and his son Sean were heading home, and the boy, although small, was already working in the field, commanding respect. This guy was indeed Sean, but his origins were not of this world. In fact, he was previously a 21st century programmer. As a result of an error in the experiment, he lost his former life. Immediately after this, the programmer woke up in another body and became the real Sean. It seemed as if he was in medieval Europe, where the landowner ruled the surrounding villages and their inhabitants paid taxes for housing. Although Sean knew little about the world, he gradually discovered new things. Suddenly, together with his father, they discovered something alarming that caused panic. When confronted with something unusual, Sean remained calm, but his surprise was incredible. An unknown flying object fell rapidly to the ground, ending up very close to the father and son. The caring father immediately began to save his son from the possible danger emanating from the unidentified object. The amazing vehicle was on fire and was rapidly approaching the ground, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. After a few seconds of free fall, the mysterious object exploded in a powerful explosion. People around could not understand what was happening because such an event simply could not happen. The main character could not believe his eyes, realizing that this object might belong to aliens. Sometime later, events took place in the house where the hero and his father lived. It turned out that the owner was not at home at the time, and his wife announced that no one should approach the retail outlet until he returned. The father explained to his son that he was in charge of the settlements, and it was important to follow his instructions or else serious problems would arise. The man was grateful that his son listened to him, considering that his mother had left this world too early and Sean had been through a lot. In any case, it was necessary to go to bed early today in order to prepare for tomorrow's work in the field. Several hours later, events continued late into the night. Sean was glad that his father was finally asleep and was going to check out his treasures. The only valuable possession in their home was a war horse. Its speed and endurance were astonishing, and thanks to his father's persistence and encouragement, Sean mastered horse riding, a very rare skill in the village. The guy was eager to get to the unknown flying object to conduct its examination. The mysterious object resembled a flying saucer, and no one knew what caused its appearance here. When he reached the aircraft, Sean realized that if he waited for the owner, he would have no chance of revealing its secrets. After a few minutes of searching, the guy discovered a mysterious object nearby that looked quite valuable. The box turned out to be extremely strong and survived the explosion, which indicated that there was something valuable in it. Realizing that there might be dangers here, Sean decided to take the box with him to study its contents at home. At home, he continued to look at the mysterious black box with surprise. When he opened it, Sean hoped for the presence of alien treasures and was eager to find out what this artifact concealed. Inside the box was a solar panel made in China, indicating future technology. In addition, the box contained another unknown item made in China. The item was a pair of VR glasses, which were packaged in sturdy packaging, presumably to keep them safe. Having put on the glasses, the guy decided to try them out by pressing the button located on the device. After pressing the button, he was instantly transported to an unknown world, completely different from the previous one. The space around began to change its appearance, and the ground beneath my feet seemed to disappear, giving me the opportunity to float in this virtual world. With the help of magic glasses, Sean, finding himself in a new world, could literally float in the air, becoming the only person in this place. Raising his head, he noticed something surprising and headed in that direction. It turned out that it was a girl who greeted the guy and introduced him to the multifunctional training system. The beautiful girl continued to watch Sean, preparing to tell him more about the multifunctional training system. Looking around, the guy realized that the glasses were directly connected to this place. But in a virtual space, there was no sense of tactility, which made everything a little strange, different from reality. It seemed like it was a virtual space with virtual objects floating around. In the 21st century, similar technologies did exist, but they were not at such a high level, and these glasses apparently came from a more advanced place. Then the girl, named Alice, revealed that Sean was in the main hall of the multifunctional training system, and that she was an artificial intelligence. Feeling a little awkward, Sean decided to check whether this system really constituted training. After all, previously education was completely different and did not resemble what he saw now. Alice had actually given him access to any skill, and there was everything he could want to learn here. She also provided props and a place to train, promising him unlimited access to various techniques for developing his brain and physical abilities. The skill tree allowed you to choose any technique you wanted to learn. Surprised, Sean realized that in this world where humanity's knowledge was limited, he had access to a learning system. So he now had an external system, and Sean, being resourceful, asked if there were any side effects. Looking through the skill tree, he realized that chemistry, mathematics, and similar subjects were not required, and in order to avoid studying after death, he decided to choose the basics of agriculture. Alice explained that this was the third level and advised him to start with the basic courses, and Sean realized with alarm that there were conditions here. He had little time and asked if he could start the course on agriculture straight away. It was possible, but Alice needed to test Sean's level of knowledge, and for him, it was not a problem since he had already learned the basics. The AI agreed and decided to conduct a test. The material was similar to what was in the books, and Sean wanted to choose something within his capabilities. Suddenly, a notification appeared that the system apologizes because the selected file was lost. Alarmed, Sean approached Alice to find out what this meant, and she replied that there might have been an accident and there was a problem with the database. So something else had to be chosen, but even when choosing the basics of mathematics, the data was lost. He then took basic chemistry, but the data was also lost, just like for basic martial arts, and Sean was in despair. He asked the system to download files with available materials for study. The only materials available were the basics of Chinese chess and radio gymnastics, and Sean did not want to study such useless courses. 10 hours later, he was already playing Chinese chess. The game reached a decisive moment, and Sean finally made his first check. Alice was amazed by his rapid progress in learning and congratulated Sean, who had now successfully completed the basics of Chinese chess and was able to move on to the intermediate level of learning. Blushing slightly, the boy admitted that he really enjoyed playing chess. Suddenly, Sean had a strange feeling and he felt that something was wrong. The system instantly showed him the current local time on the continent where he was located. Seeing the time, the hero began to panic because he had spent 10 whole hours in the system and it was already getting light outside. He needed to get home as quickly as possible and start working in the field. Feeling guilty, Sean tried to quickly find a way out and leave the virtual space, but the artificial intelligence explained that there was a passive learning function here, and he did not need to worry about the passage of time outside. Looking around, the guy decided to ask Alice what passive learning was. It turned out to be a passive learning method, a process of changing the flow of time using virtual space, and as a result, the time flow slows down, and in theory this function can change the relationship of time to infinity. So time passes much faster in this space than in the real world, and Sean has been here for 10 hours, but it is not yet morning outside. Surprised by this discovery, the boy asked Alice if he could adjust this attitude to infinity himself, and Alice announced that in theory it was possible, but he had to be careful, since the changes affected his body and mind, and overdoing it could lead to serious consequences, including an explosion or damage to the spinal cord. The discovery of the possibility of staying in the system for a long time inspired Sean, and he proposed to set the time ratio to 1 to 1,000 in order to play another game of chess. Alice came closer to make sure that Sean was really ready for these changes, and she warned that overdoing it could cause damage to his body. Realizing that he did not want to put his life in danger, Sean asked the system to choose a safe ratio. After scanning Sean, Alice reported that his body was in perfect condition and could withstand changes to the 1 to 2 ratio. Deciding not to take any chances, the guy suggested setting a double ratio so he could rest and get back to work. Alice approached Sean to perform a scan, causing him to become concerned. After the scan, Alice explained that his body was ready for changes in the time ratio. A frightened Sean stepped back, not understanding why the system was scanning him. After making sure that the body was ready, Sean asked to establish a ratio of 1 to 2. With the time setting complete, Alice suggested that Sean begin learning radio gymnastics. Sean expressed his doubts, but Alice assured him that it would help improve his physical and mental performance. Looking back at Sean, the system asked if he was sure of his decision. Sean agreed, and Alice expressed her delight at his enthusiasm, suggesting that they begin training. Alice emphasized that after the first lesson, he would be able to adjust the time ratio to 1 to 3 or even more. Sean confirmed his readiness, and they began training. Alice hit Sean with her wand and announced that they needed to change their clothes to begin learning radio gymnastics. This was necessary in order to begin the first section of gymnastics. Sometime later, a new day began in the real world, but Sean was absorbed in what was happening in the system. The boy was completely immersed in what was happening to him in the virtual world. Sean had been working hard all evening, completing a variety of tasks, but now every cell in his body was reminded of the strain, and this strange condition was the result of a gymnastics that seemed not designed for humans. It reminded me of the gymnastics they taught in school, although now it looked more like advanced yoga. The boy suggested that if these exercises revealed a person's inner potential, then perhaps they could help restore the body after hard work. Resorting to gymnastics, Sean began to warm up to get rid of the pain in his body. With the help of a few radio gymnastics exercises, he literally relaxed every corner of his body, succumbing to the influence of the training. The results of the exercises really pleased Sean as they completely eliminated the pain in his body. However, while performing difficult exercises, Sean's blood pressure suddenly jumped and a bead of sweat appeared on his face. Suddenly, his father was knocking on the door and shouting at his son that it was time to get up because it was time to go to work. After several attempts to call his son, the father decided to come in and make sure he was okay. The boy continued to lie on the bed, and his father, worried, asked if everything was okay with him. The tired boy spoke about his fatigue and asked his father to give him a little more time to rest. The father, touching his son's forehead, realized that he had no fever and asked him to regain his strength, while he himself went to work in the field. Waking up some time later, Sean felt that his energy had been fully restored, but the reason for the sudden sleep remained unknown, and his head was still spinning and stars were flashing before his eyes. Looking at the box he had found, he realized that perhaps he should turn to Alice to get answers to his questions. Having put on the glasses, the main character returned to the virtual world of the system, seeking answers to his questions. Alice immediately greeted him and was happy to see him back, seeing that he was not only inside the system, but also actively training in the real world. The worried boy couldn't understand how artificial intelligence could know about this. Due to the loss of a large amount of information, Alice collected data from the outside world. The stunned boy realized that the system was monitoring his actions using only useful data. The AI collected information without paying attention to the details of his life, which gave her words a tinge of arrogance. According to Alice's data, The hero's unique body characteristics make him an ideal candidate to be a cultivator in this world. The girl explained that diligent practice is the process of using difficult conditions to stimulate the development of the body, which contributes to continuous progress and the achievement of goals. Looking at his hands, the hero realized his potential and approach to the role of a persistent cultivator. But he remained perplexed as to why. Having strengthened his body, he again fell into a deep sleep. It turned out that the energy he spent in this space was easily restored during sleep, while the restoration of energy spent in the outside world required more time. Physical strength and intelligence are closely related, and if energy consumption exceeds the norm, it goes into self-preservation mode, that is, sleep. The young man realized that in space he could exhaust himself without limit, but the outside world required periods of rest, although this seemed absurd to him. The system didn't appreciate his expression and hit him straight on the head, reminding him of the passive learning method, and train your body here, and you will become stronger outside. The guy believed that this method was also useful in the real world. Indeed, data analysis confirmed that his physical abilities were superior to most adults. Deciding not to waste time, the guy intended to continue training. After several hours of hard work, he was on his knees, admitting that he could not do it anymore. The system was strict and accused Sean of weakness. The second part began, and the expenditure of physical and mental strength increased, and in his current state, he did not meet the minimum requirements of the test. Alice suggested that he brush up on the first part a little more in order to quickly master the new material. Changing her appearance, she announced that they had 6 more hours to study. In her new guise, Alice began to teach the boy, showing him how to do certain exercises. The difficulty of the exercises made the boy breathe heavily, but the artificial intelligence encouraged him, reminding him that he was a cultivator called upon to overcome obstacles. With each level of difficulty of the exercises, the strength of the main character increased several times. After several more complex exercises, the guy couldn't stand it anymore and exclaimed that he already knew everything and would continue practicing himself. At that very moment, he disappeared into the system, which greatly surprised Alice, and she asked him to wait. Ignoring the girl, Sean realized that this was a dangerous and grueling ordeal. However, he felt that his physical and spiritual strength had been restored, and the passive teaching method had proved effective. That is why the guy decided to test the results of his difficult training and practice. After some time, he began to fill the barrel with water and noticed that it was happening much faster. To fill a full barrel, he needed only 7.5 buckets, unlike the previous little Selenok, when he ran back and forth with half a bucket more than 10 times. Now he fills full buckets, carries water faster, and the work has become much more efficient. Feeling stronger, Sean realized he had radio gymnastics to thank. At this time, the father approached with a heavy load, experiencing difficulties. The joyful son immediately helped his father, testing his strength in practice. The worried father shouted to his son to wait because the bundle of firewood was really heavy. But it turned out that the son easily picked up the bundle and carried it to its destination. Thus, events developed day by day. Every day, he continued to train hard in the artificial intelligence system. And every day, he helped his father, who did not have the opportunity to train in the system and was much weaker. The man literally cried as he watched Sean grow up and spoke to his estranged wife, urging her to look at their son who was finally becoming an adult. After some time, the events continued late in the evening. The main character was lying on his bed wearing virtual reality glasses. While training, he decided to ask Alice how much time he had left to move to the ordinary world. There was only a minute on the timer, and he had to complete the exercise as quickly as possible. For the tired young man, this minute became a real epic, the longest in his life. Finally, The time ran out, and the system gave Sean the opportunity to finally relax. With a heavy sigh, the guy was glad that the training seemed to have finally come to an end, and he could allow himself to rest a little. Alice began to provide statistics, emphasizing that he had mastered the moves from the second lesson in just 40 days, and the AI noted that Sean had shown outstanding diligence, which deserved praise, and so it was decided to continue training. Standing up, the boy asked why he felt Alice's praise sounded insincere. Smiling, the girl admitted that Sean is a real joker, and her first rule is honesty, and so when she praises, she does it sincerely. Now that he had completed the second lesson, he was interested in the possibility of setting up passive learning. Thanks to persistent training, the protagonist could now control the time ratio in a ratio of 1:4. By suddenly raising his hands, the boy made the artificial intelligence think that he was about to fly. Turning around, the boy asked if passive training was already set up since he hadn't noticed any changes, and Alice replied that his body had undergone a lot of training, which was enough to mitigate the negative effects of the time ratio change. But if he wanted to feel something new, the girl was ready to arrange it for him, and from what he heard, Sean was shocked and did not want to continue training. The guy had been showing good results lately, and the system advised him to master a new skill, the basics of firewood preparation. During this time, Alice collected information and created a primary database. After a series of calculations and analysis of his abilities, she created a suitable skill for him, and now he had the opportunity to pick up an axe and learn how to use it. Suddenly, a special axe, different from the usual one, appeared in the training inventory, and the guy liked this game element, and it instantly materialized in the digital space. Not understanding why this change had occurred, the slightly worried hero decided to find out why he had gone through so many trials just to chop wood, when he thought his abilities would allow him to fight in more exciting scenarios. Meanwhile, the props were successfully set up, and the system recreated the giant log. Without answering the boy's question, Alice announced that he could now begin the first test. After several hours of hard training, the main character felt incredibly tired. But Alice encouraged him to work hard, claiming that training became more effective in the heat. In the end, after the training was completed, a total of 765 logs were chopped. The training lasted for 12 hours, and during this time he chopped wood without a break, and before, the guy had not experienced such fatigue even after a 10-kilometer run. The AI admitted that he had shown ordinary endurance, and even she could barely keep up with him, and now it was time to check if the energy in his body had increased. Sean literally felt the power filling him, and he felt lightness in his body, and Alice also reminded him that in the outside world he was in a state of sleep, and there was no need to worry about muscle pain. After completing the training, the hero was transported back to the real world, where it was already beginning to get light. Getting out of bed, the guy noticed something strange. In particular, he noticed not only an increase in strength, but also an improvement in reaction. As Sean walked outside, he saw his father busy chopping wood. Turning around, the father was surprised that his son had gotten up so early without touching the breakfast that was already set on the table. Looking closely at the firewood, the boy admitted that he didn't want to go to the field today. The father agreed, allowing his son to rest a little. It turned out that Sean remembered that the knight's estate always needed firewood, and he decided to chop it up for sale, taking advantage of this to warm up. The surprised man thought that the boy would not be able to cope with this task, since chopping would require strength that he did not have. In preparation for the first log, the guy began to warm up, holding an axe in his hands. Swinging his axe deftly, he was determined and ready to chop down the giant log. With just one precise blow, he managed to split a huge log. For the unsuspecting man, this was truly strange, for he could not believe that the little guy was capable of such a thing. Looking at his father, Sean admitted that he had grown a little bit, and that was why he had become stronger. Remembering the past events, the father really understood, because it seemed that this little boy had really grown up. Sometime later, the protagonist's aunt showed up, wanting to know why Sean was chopping wood and where his father was. The smart boy greeted Aunt Joey and told her that he would take the wood to the farmstead himself, while his father went to work in the field. Joey had prepared a lot of food that day so that she and her father could enjoy dinner when he returned, which was especially important for Sean given his growth and development. While watching his aunt, the boy noticed that his father liked his Aunt Joey, and every time she used this excuse to meet him. However, it seemed that the father was deliberately avoiding her, and probably he could not forget the loss of his wife. The confused woman asked Sean to tell her father when he returned that she planned to go to the estate the next day and ask him for a horse. While tasting the cookies, the hero decided to find out why his aunt was going there again, considering that she had just been there. It turned out that her older brother had returned and was looking for students, and there were 3 young men in the village who wanted to go with her. Sean was shocked by this news, realizing that Uncle Willen had returned, having succeeded in the art of blacksmithing and opened his own forge on the estate. Realizing that this was a top-class blacksmith, Sean exclaimed that he wanted to become his apprentice. That's why Sean exclaimed that he also wanted to become Uncle Willen's apprentice. At this time, the father approached the house and wanted to know why Joey was there, as if his son had done something wrong. Annie explained that Sean was smart and didn't give her any trouble, and she told him that Willen had come back and wanted to take 3 boys as apprentices, and she had come to ask Bond for a horse. Looking at his father with determination, Sean also admitted that he wanted to become Uncle Willen's apprentice. At this news, Bond dropped the firewood and shouted that this was absurd. Blacksmith Willen had qualified for the highest rank, and his status was only equal to the owner of the manor, and his apprentices were also not ordinary people, and Sean had a vague idea of where he was heading. The kindly aunt began to stand up for the boy, asking Bond to not be so cruel to Sean. The boy also told his father that he had the strength and confidence to become his disciple. Sean has really become very resilient, and it would be worth noticing in such a short time. Looking at the many logs, the father admitted that this was indeed the case. Coming closer, Joey began to talk about how Sean was a good boy and that it was worth giving him a chance because you could at least try. Having accepted his son's fate, the father agreed, realizing that his offspring was truly ready to take a risk in this matter. These enthusiastic words filled the boy with joy, and he exclaimed to his father, assuring him that he would never let him down. Sometime later, a dark night fell in the city. Despite the training he had undergone, Sean continued to improve his body and develop his abilities, striving to become stronger. Having decided to tell Alice about his intention to become a blacksmith's apprentice, the boy expressed his desire to master the art of firewood preparation at the highest level. Alice, being an honest, kind, and wise artificial intelligence, stated that he was not yet ready to fully master this skill. Convinced of the ease of the task, Sean believed that sharpening the axe was just a matter of time and there was nothing more to improve. But the system insisted that he give the opportunity to demonstrate art in its perfect form. Having accurately thrown the log in the air, Alice decided to demonstrate something unusual, accessible only with perfect mastery of technology. The log was cut into several small pieces in a matter of seconds. In an instant, artificial intelligence was able to destroy a giant log, turning it into small logs. Sean, who at first doubted that a human could do such a thing, remembered that Alice was not human. The system also recognized that the desire to become a blacksmith's apprentice was a completely reasonable decision, contributing to the improvement of his physical abilities and mastery of the art of cutting firewood. Confused, the boy also supported the idea, but was afraid that the blacksmith villain might refuse him training, and Alice tried to cheer him up, claiming that he had trained hard and was confident that he would be accepted. The hero decided to stand firmly on his feet in this world, considering this the first step to becoming the strongest. The next day continued with events, and the father stood nearby, seeing his son off. Joey was also ready to go, taking 3 more guys with her. The aunt decided to ask the guy if he was ready to go to the estate, and the determined guy answered that he was ready. Joey tried to calm Bond down, assuring him that if Willen didn't accept him, he would return him safe and sound. The son also turned to his father to tell him something important. Specifically, Sean made a request that when he was gone, his father would take care of Aunt Joey. The embarrassed father immediately reassured his son, warning him against expressing such meaningless thoughts. Despite all his doubts, Sean still headed to the estate, saying goodbye to his father and ordering him to take care of himself. The man watched his son and waved back, believing that he would succeed in his endeavors. Several hours later, events continued to unfold in the city. The protagonist and the aunt shared one horse, and the boys accompanying them were also in the saddle, and they were heading to the forge where they intended to become blacksmith's apprentices. Looking around, Sean noticed that the town was indeed picturesquely lively. After a long journey, they finally arrived at Valena's forge. A joyful Joey exclaimed to her brother about the arrival, to which the blacksmith Willen expressed joy at learning that he had new apprentices who had come to help him. Blacksmith Willen was very grateful for the arrival of his students, because he had been lacking assistance for a long time. The huge man greeted the potential students, turning his attention to the small boy. The formidable blacksmith, amazed with his impressive size and impressive muscles, leaving everyone in delight with his skills. The 3 potential students felt a slight fear of him, but Sean and Joey stood by his side as if they considered him a kindred spirit. At first glance, the man with the frowning expression showed that he was glad that his little sister had finally arrived, and yet she was not inclined to hug, citing the looks of the children around her. Noticing the confusion, Willen noted that his sister was tired, and perhaps he should stay here longer, since he had a lot of things to do in the village. A caring Joey introduced her brother to these strong young men, hoping that one of them might interest Willen as a student. The first guy with long hair made my brother doubt it. The next smiling guy seemed like a good candidate for a blacksmith's apprentice. The third student, with a muscular build, looked promising. But the fourth student gave him a strange feeling. Looking down, the huge man asked what kind of monkey was in front of him. Willen exclaimed that he was accepting only the strongest young men as students when recruiting for the kindergarten. The crowd immediately started laughing, but Sean and Joey remained serious. The outraged sister shouted that it was Bond's son named Sean. Feeling awkward, the man began to laugh, asking if this was really Bond's son. In an instant, the brother remembered that this was the son of the one Joey liked, and the meeting was joyful. The big man's mood changed, and he approached the boy, happy to meet him since they had not seen each other for a long time. The remembering brother began to joke, apologizing for not recognizing Sean, explaining that he had grown up and changed. The friendly big guy smiled and said that Uncle Willen couldn't give him anything, so he took a few axes that might be useful at home and invited the boy to come by if he needed anything else. The young man took the axes, but said that they already had plenty at home. Instead of rejecting Sean, the man invited him to take a walk around the estate, promising to treat him to some tasty treats. Joey didn't like this approach and shouted out that Sean actually wanted to become a blacksmith's apprentice. The brother was amazed by this unexpected information and felt literally shocked. He watched the boy and couldn't believe that he wanted to become his student, and it was such a difficult task. A determined Sean responded with a loud shout that he was not afraid of difficulties and was ready to take on any challenges. The man continued to claim that the boy was too young and did not have enough strength and stamina for blacksmithing. Not losing hope, Sean said he still wanted to try. During all this time, the sister begged her brother to accept the boy. The big guy realized that his little sister had brought a persistent person, and this was not surprising. Together, they headed towards the forge to take a closer look. People around began to talk about how Villain was accepting students again, but not many would be able to achieve the goal, since last time none of the 4 candidates were accepted, and it seemed like they had to rely on luck because the selection was too difficult. Coming closer to the forge, Villain called his assistant Ed. The muscular guy immediately came running, reporting to the teacher that he was there and that he was the first student. The teacher decided to ask his student to set an example for the new arrivals so that they could see how to work. The huge guy took an axe and had to chop the log in front of him. Swinging the huge axe, he began to use all his strength to perform complex actions. With one blow, the student managed to split the log into 2 parts. The axe blade cut the log in half, showing that it took technique as well as strength, and they saw Ed chopping wood, and everyone admired him. Willem believed that this was the minimum standard to achieve, and that one should not think that chopping wood was easy and that it took several years of training to reach Ed's level. Once they had completed this minimum requirement, they could become Valena's apprentices, and the 3 candidates thought it was too difficult, but only Sean exclaimed that he could handle it. In any case, the blacksmith insisted that each of them try and demonstrate their abilities. The first candidate to approach was the one with long hair, and his confidence left much to be desired. He swung his axe and began to chop the log, but his technique was far from perfect, according to the experienced blacksmith. The experienced master did not like this technique and invited the next candidate. Next up was a guy who was almost accepted but couldn't even hit the log. This man seemed like the ideal candidate, and the blacksmith moved on to the next one. Next up was a fairly muscular guy who was up to the task. The guy showed off his muscles while preparing to carry out the task. Swinging the axe, he looked like he could handle the task with ease. Everyone who watched this was amazed at how easily the boy held the axe. There was a powerful blow to the log, and everyone thought that he would pass the task. But unfortunately, the task was a failure, as the log was split unevenly. With a heavy sigh, Willem assumed that there would be no new students this year, and he asked Joey to take them to the market later where they could pick something up. The upset sister agreed, and they were ready to leave. Suddenly, the boy exclaimed to Uncle Willem that he still had to try to complete the task. The good-natured blacksmith did not take the boy seriously because he was too small and, in his opinion, could not even lift an axe. However, seeing the boy's determination, Willem gave him a chance and handed him a small axe. The determined guy was grateful for this chance and was ready to fight to the end. As he prepared to perform the task, Sean knew he had to be extremely careful. He had trained countless times in space and at home, and now it was time to put all his skills to use. Previously, Alice had already shared with him the information that he had successfully completed the first stage of mastering the skill of chopping wood, and he was looking forward to using those skills here. With his axe swinging to its maximum, Sean sincerely hoped to complete the current task. The moment came for a powerful blow that hit the exact center of the log. The log instantly split into 2 small pieces, making it appear as if Sean's task had actually been easy. With a smile on his face, the boy turned to his uncle, asking whether he had completed the task correctly. The sudden turn of events stunned Valena, because in front of him was a strong tree, usually used to create warrior shields, and not everyone could split it. Taking one look at the young man, the blacksmith asked him about his age, and it turned out that Sean was only 9 years old. So Willem was impressed by the boy's strength and talent, but admitted that Sean was also lucky because things didn't always work out so well for him at home. A pleased Willem instructed Joey to tell Bond that his son was a natural-born blacksmith and that he would be happy to teach him everything he knew. This news also pleased the little sister, and she eagerly awaited a conversation with Bond. 3 months have passed since the completion of the trial. The protagonist trained hard in metal forging, making every effort to become the best in his craft. The little guy was already a master of wielding a giant hammer, something that not every adult could master. Using the skills he had learned, he was able to easily forge various objects. It turned out that Sean had achieved in 3 months what it had taken Ed 12 years of mastery in forging steel swords to achieve. Addressing his brother, Sean said that his experience and intelligence were superior to those of Ed, and his physical coordination was more balanced. The student noticed that Sean was not only skilled in blacksmithing, but also knew how to give compliments, which surprised him. Willen entered the room and invited Sean to join him. It turned out that the man had a special gift for the guy, and he wanted to show it to Sean. Entering the room, the blacksmith took out a box that was going to become something special for the young man. He gave the young man a chance to look at the sword and asked Sean what he thought of it. It seemed to the hero that this sword did not stand out from the others in any way, and the only thing that caught his eye was that the blade was slightly longer than that of an ordinary sword. The hero thought that the design of the sword's hilt could be improved. Perhaps something could be inserted into it, and the blacksmith agreed that the boy, like Yun, showed amazing intelligence. It turned out that in front of him was the magic sword that Valena's teacher had given to him before leaving forever. The stunned guy immediately became interested in whether magic really exists in this world. The man assumed that this would surprise the boy, and among the inhabitants of the world there were knights and warriors whom he had seen many times, but he had only met the wizard once, and then only the silhouette of his back. Sean's teacher was a famous blacksmith who had a good friend who was a wizard. Together, they created a variety of magical instruments, the fame of which spread throughout the kingdom. The sources of magic were basically of the same nature, but differed in detail, and these 3 spheres were magic cores extracted from magical beasts. If one of the cores was inserted into the sword, the entire power of the weapon would be concentrated in his hands. Taking the sword in his hands, the hero was amazed and could not understand how this was possible. Grabbing the blade, the young man looked at it as if it were a magic wand in his hands. He immediately tried to strike to see how the magic worked. The boy still couldn't understand why nothing was happening, and then the teacher explained to him that the sword had been broken a long time ago. This turn of events greatly upset the boy, as he really wanted to see the magic that this sword possessed. After their death, both creators left behind a grimoire that described the method of creating magical artifacts, and unfortunately, no one was able to understand it, but the teacher hoped that Sean would pass it on to his most promising student to study the creation of artifacts. Villain sincerely believed that Sean was a good boy, which is why he wanted to give him this sword, hoping that he would be able to reveal all of its secrets. Some time later, a deep and dark night came. While at rest, the hero observed the sword and grimoire located in front of him. Despite his prolonged attention, it seemed to him that it was just an ordinary piece of iron. The moment Sean picked up the grimoire, mysterious inscriptions began to instantly appear on its pages. Every second there were more and more of them, and they had to reveal how to create magical items. The clever and excited boy immediately realized that Master Villain was right, and these were indeed symbols that he had never encountered before. Seeing this, Alice was left in shock, as she could not understand why the guy suddenly started using his spiritual power. This question greatly surprised the hero, because the use of spiritual power usually becomes available after completing the second part of the initial stage of gymnastics. However, the guy managed to activate it ahead of time, and this of course was good news, but there could be side effects in the form of short-term headache. After showing the grimoire, Sean decided to approach the AI and asked if it could help decipher these symbols. 4 of the 5 pages were written with energy change diagrams, and one wondered why Sean needed this. Unfortunately, even clever Alice could not answer this question. Confused, the boy decided to ask her if she had any information about Valena, and why they were both acting like this remained unknown. It turned out that the hero was very lucky, because the system was able to display all the symbols, and the first sheet said that training should begin with the 5th sheet. The boy wasn't sure whether he should start training with the fifth sheet, but Alice suggested that he should touch it. Alarmed, Sean began to think that this action could have serious consequences. Little by little, he reached out his hand to the grimoire to touch the fifth page. As soon as he did this, magical rays of energy appeared around him in an instant. Many different seals surrounded him, and the magic allowed him to float in the air. Looking around, the worried guy wanted to know if Alice was next to him. The boy's sudden appeal was joined by a wizard who wanted to know if he was truly the chosen one. Feeling very anxious, Sean couldn't understand who the chosen one was and where he was at all. The elder immediately began to calm him down, explaining that he was the creator of this grimoire, and this place was a magical space created by him. Joyful Sean instantly realized that the old man he was talking to was indeed the very friend of the wizard, the teacher of his teacher, Willin. This news made the magician very happy, and he asked how much time had passed since then, and the boy replied that the teacher told him that the elder lived about 200 or 300 years ago. This turned out to be true, and now Sean was communicating with the fragment of his soul that remained in the grimoire. Surprised, the boy asked what happened to the old man's body, to which he replied that his body had returned to nature. Feeling uneasy, Sean noted that he used to think that wizards lived for a very long time. It turned out that the stronger the wizard, the longer his life path, and the old man lived 200 years, being a wizard of the average level. The boy was delighted with this news, thinking that wizards were given the opportunity to live so long. But the old man explained that not everyone is born with the ability to do magic, and it is rare to meet real wizards. In this world, among thousands of people, perhaps only one is born with a natural ability for magic. Even if such people begin to study magic, many of them remain students, and real wizards are no more common than creatures like a phoenix feather or a unicorn horn. Sean can feel at ease because, having entered the space of the grimoire and met the elder, he already has the potential to learn magic. Confused, the hero explained that he really only wanted to become a wizard to live longer. This answer amazed the magician, since in his entire long life he had never heard of such a goal, and it seemed that the guy did not think about other aspects that would open up for him in the world of magic. Raising his hand, the old man exclaimed, urging the boy to broaden his horizons. Using his magical powers, Sean was transported to another time because the wizard wanted to show him something important. Initially, the elder did not want to talk about wizards, starting with the fact that they could become respected even by the king. After all, wizards are not only rare, but also extremely powerful. If in a war one of the sides has a wizard at his disposal, the outcome of the battle is already predetermined, since he can turn the situation in his favor in an instant. This is precisely where the so-called undeniable power of wizards lies. Another situation is possible when the wizard decides to defend the kingdom. He will be provided with all the necessary means and will have his own secluded training center built where he can fully immerse himself in the study of the art of magic. The training center will be huge and will only train one mage. The magic tower will be completely subordinate to his will, giving him the opportunity to improve his magical skills. This was exactly what a true wizard should strive for. The young man was deeply impressed by all these discoveries, and so he strongly desired to become a wizard, and asked if the old man could become his mentor. Suddenly, Sean noticed that the wizard's figure began to disappear, and he exclaimed, assuming that the time allotted to his soul fragment was coming to an end. The grimoire he held in his hands was only meant to serve as an introduction to the art of magic, but it should last a long time, the magician declared. Sean continued to beg the old man to wait and not disappear so quickly. However, the next moment, the old man who had lived for 200 years as a wizard disappeared. Suddenly, Sean woke up, and Alice kept waking him up, asking if he was okay, as he had remained unconscious for some time. The embarrassed young man exclaimed that he was already awake and everything was fine, and so he asked Alice not to cuddle so tightly against him. Sometime later, the hero decided to share with the artificial intelligence what had happened to him earlier, and it was not surprising to Alice that he suddenly lost consciousness. The determined young man finally understood all the details of what had happened. After all, he strives to study magic and live longer than anyone else, becoming the most powerful wizard in history. After thinking for a bit, Alice decided to ask the owner if he had asked the wizard about the methods of studying magic, but unfortunately, Sean did not have time to clarify this. In any case, after turning off her master, Alice conducted an analysis of the Iron Grimoire. When he entered the virtual space, he was very curious about magic, but Sean was also eager to know how Alice was able to reproduce those iron sheets in virtual reality. It was a common method of searching the subconscious. She reproduced what he saw through his memories so that he could recall it in virtual space. Blushing, Sean realized that Alice could see everything he saw, even when he was in the shower. Turning away from the guy, the artificial intelligence also boasted that during the analysis, she was able to master the methods of studying magic. Before he could begin training, he needed to develop his spiritual power, and the fifth leaf of the grimoire contained information on how to do this. Once his spiritual power reached a sufficient level, he could begin learning magic as described on the fourth sheet, but Sean wanted to learn how to develop spiritual power. Then Alice decided to summon something to show the hero how he could do it. What he saw really amazed the young man because he did not expect to see something like that. There was a huge seal in front of him, and he couldn't understand what it meant. So the guy asked if this had anything to do with spiritual power because he couldn't understand this complex picture at all. In fact, it was all quite simple, and he just had to organize everything according to the patterns in the image. It was worth noting the patterns that followed a certain order. First from one part to the other, then diagonally. It was also necessary to connect them together, but Sean exclaimed that he could not do this. The owner's nose started bleeding. The system immediately noticed this and wanted to know what was going on because he fainted again. Sometime later, events took place in the real world, where the main character was making metal. Watching the boy, the teacher did not notice how he had already achieved outstanding results, and it was hard to believe that he was only 9 years old, and yet the student realized that this was not surprising, because for him, there was nothing more exciting than working in the forge. The tired boy reflected that some time had passed since he had started training using radio gymnastics, and now his body had become noticeably stronger. Despite several days of spiritual power training without any visible results, perhaps he is yet to find a suitable method. Welena decided to approach his student and remind him that it was late and Ed could finish the remaining work, and he emphasized the importance of a balanced combination of work and rest. Returning to his room, the boy realized that Mr. Willen and the others still didn't know about something. Namely, that he is currently studying in a virtual space, while devoting only 3 hours of sleep to maintain optimal shape. A few seconds later, the boy was back in the system, and Alice noticed that he had arrived very early today. This was true, since this way he had more time to train his spiritual power, and the host condition was a source of concern for the system, considering that he hadn't even managed to reach 60% the previous time. Without hesitation, the hero agreed, because this is precisely why he strives to continue to avoid failures in the future. Concentrating entirely on his studies, Sean shouted for Alice to stop interfering this time and decided to try studying on his own. Using his magical abilities and developing his strength of spirit, the hero began to act. Incredible efforts were put into filling and using the magic seal. With each passing second, his strength was fading, but the guy continued to use his fortitude to complete what he had started. Sean screamed in pain as the effort caused him tremendous pain. Opening his eyes, the boy heard the voice of the system, which praised him for his excellent work. Now the owner succeeded, and Alice decided to congratulate him. In fact, she didn't expect any other result from him, because the owner is really cool, and she decided to hug him for it. Together, they watched the magical seal that was used, imbued with energy. Suddenly, another drawing appeared on the wall, which looked much more complex than the previous one. Alice realized that this was the second stage, but Sean could not understand how many more there might be: red light, green light, and other similar tests. After several hours of hard training, it was noticeable that the hero was very tired. The worried system also noticed that the host's body might soon give out, so it asked if he was sure he wanted to continue. The smart boy wanted to continue, knowing that the faster he learned these skills, the faster he would become stronger. Overcoming the pain, the guy did everything possible to finish what he started. Fortunately, he succeeded and was able to complete the second seal. He had really worked hard, and Alice knew that he had only been training his spiritual power for 3 days, but he had already completed a rather complex scheme. Developing spiritual power was indeed difficult, but after each training session, the boy felt that it was noticeably increasing. After thinking for a bit, the system decided to check the current state of the owner. Looking at the specifications, she was truly amazed by what she saw, and she immediately decided to ask the guy if he was really 9 years old. As a result of the study, the system showed that his training this month had already allowed him to develop spiritual power higher than that of ordinary people. The joyful hero wanted to know what exactly his spiritual power was. At this point, his spiritual strength already satisfies the minimum requirements of this training method. However, there was one thing that Alice did not want to talk about. Right now, her database only contains his parameters, but judging by the information from the grimoire, he is currently the slowest in developing spiritual power among all those who study magic. Then the system began to encourage him, telling him that he shouldn't give up because it was not too late to change his profession. Suddenly, Sean realized something and quickly calmed down. As he got up, he began to call Alice because he wanted to tell her something. She once said that as long as his body could cope, he was free to increase the time ratio. A little worried, the system admitted that this was indeed the case. In this regard, Sean wanted to know if he could establish a 1:10 time ratio, and Alice advised that for the 150 ratio, he needed to learn the movement of the second part of the intermediate level of radio gymnastics, and for 1:100, he needed to learn all the movements of the intermediate level of this course. The smart young man understood that it was really difficult, but there was hope. As long as there was Alice, as long as there was a passive learning method, time was not a problem. The events continued 2 months later. Sean was training hard in the system and in real life to become stronger. Returning to the system, he knew that the 4th lesson of the first part had already been completed. Then the system suddenly began to congratulate him on something, although he himself did not know the real reason for the congratulations. It turned out that these congratulations are connected with the fact that the owner can now set the time ratio to 8:1. With a heavy sigh, Alice admitted that she was sad because the owner had recently been constantly doing gymnastics outside and did not even visit her. Confused, the boy yelled at her to calm down and quickly teach him the moves from lesson 5 because he wanted to increase the time ratio to 10:1. This approach did not suit the system at all because the owner stopped training spiritual power. Just recently, Alice decided to scan his broken magic sword and finally realized something important. In the original, he can use spiritual power to reforge the sword. Hearing this shocked Sean. He was shocked by this turn of events, but happy at the same time. However, the energy creation circuit of this sword requires at least 200 units of spiritual power, otherwise it cannot be repaired. But, according to Alice's calculations, the guy only had 100-something. If he trains his spiritual power for 50 hours a day, he will be able to reforge his magic sword in 2 months. The hero did not immediately want to train spiritual power, but then agreed. The guy was sincerely glad that he was able to reach new heights in this craft. Suddenly, Alice ran up and congratulated the owner, because his speed of training spiritual power had noticeably increased. Continuing to speak, Alice exclaimed that, if time was to be believed, then but at the same second she seemed to begin to disappear. Some interference appeared, and Alice's hologram gradually disappeared. The artificial intelligence began to disappear and literally fell on the hero because it was exhausted. Feeling very sad, the girl turned to her master. It turned out that she was running low on battery and needed to replace the battery, although the guy thought that she was from the future and did not need to be charged. Here it was necessary to take out the battery and leave it in a sunny place, and it would automatically recharge, but Alice was sorry that at this time she could not be near the hero. The worried guy immediately decided to ask how long it would take to charge the battery, and the artificial intelligence replied that with enough sunlight, about half a month, and the battery would charge. Feeling very sad, Sean exclaimed that he would miss Alice very much. Suddenly, the girl wanted to tell him something else. She decided to ask if he had prepared everything to create the magic sword. Nodding, the hero confirmed that he had prepared everything to create the sword. Suddenly, Alice began to summon something unusual, like a mechanism that came from another planet. It turned out that it was a diagram for recreating a magic sword. Now the guy had to remember this pattern to reproduce the sword. The hologram showed lines indicating the sequence of creation of the magic sword. The boy immediately stood up, deciding that if he remembered the diagram, he would be able to reforge the magic sword. Theoretically, this was possible, but it needed to be tested in practice. Despite its simplicity, the scheme began to be confusing. Smiling, Alice remarked that he would get used to it over time and compared spiritual power training to riding a bicycle and the sword pattern to driving a car. Now the guy had to gradually get used to this. The brave boy thanked Alice, promising that he would not let her efforts down. In response, loving Alice kissed her master on the forehead as a sign of gratitude. Smiling one last time, she expressed hope for the next meeting and wished him success. Some time later, events took place in the protagonist's room. Lying on the floor, the boy felt dizzy and could barely get up. Realizing he had lied to Alice, Sean reflected on how even just looking at the diagram made him feel dizzy. Rising resolutely to his feet, the boy understood that Alice should not worry. And he won't give up because he has a system with artificial intelligence. The next morning, events took place in the kitchen, where the blacksmith and his apprentices were having breakfast. While eating the bread, the guy thought that almost a month had passed since he put the battery on charge, and in the evening he decided to try putting it back in. The attentive Willen noted that Sean had been developing rapidly lately, and this fact did not leave the blacksmith indifferent. Astonished by this turn of events, Sean expressed gratitude to his mentor, realizing that they were not usually allowed to talk during lunch. As if enchanted, the man looked at his student again and exclaimed, advising him not to thank him, because his talent was something brilliant, and Sean was as if destined to become a master of steel forging. Ed also confirmed that Sean is truly an impressive talent and will definitely become a famous blacksmith. While the boy was thinking about the reasons why everyone insisted on him becoming a blacksmith, since his cherished goal was to become a wizard, Villain decided to advise the guy to prepare carefully. After all, Knight Scott will soon be returning, and Sean must demonstrate the results of his work over the past months. It turned out that the blacksmith intended to ask the knight to take him and Ed to the city of Saiha so that they could take the exam for novice blacksmiths. Feeling uneasy, Sean began to express the opinion that everything was happening too quickly, but the blacksmith insisted that everything should go that way. Because together with Ed, they're already powerful enough, and Sean should think carefully about what he wants to create by then. But don't worry too much, just show your best abilities, and they will definitely pass the exam. Entering his room, the hero hurried to the bed to get the battery. Taking the battery out of the VR glasses, he inserted it, hoping that the system would work. Taking the glasses in his hands, he realized that he had not seen Alice for almost a month. Putting on his glasses, Sean finally returned to the system and greeted her. Looking around, the guy didn't see a single soul, and he was terribly worried, thinking that perhaps Alice was no longer in the system. Not believing his eyes, he assumed that perhaps she had run out of battery and disappeared somewhere. Fortunately, Alice was alive and was happy to meet him, as she missed him very much. The hero was glad that the girl was here, because he was afraid that something had happened to the car, but in fact she was just teasing him. The girl heard rumors that the guy had a chance to leave the place where they were and go to a big city. This information irritated the guy a little, as he thought that Alice, during her charging, was watching him, and in fact, she simply read his memories. With a heavy sigh, the boy expressed his dissatisfaction, saying that Alice was like a stalker and that children also have the right to personal space, and he wanted to leave to train spiritual powers, but Alice stopped him, suggesting that he consider this as an excellent opportunity. Turning around, Sean asked what exactly Alice was talking about, and she explained that he could leave and find a better place. Angry, the protagonist could not understand why he had to leave, and he was only 10 years old, and he thought that the system thought that moving was the best choice. According to Alice, he does have powers, and their number is growing every day, and she also warned that by staying here, he may miss the opportunity to learn new aspects of magic. If Sean wants to successfully develop in magic, the system advises him to leave his current place. Embarrassed, the guy agreed and said he would try. Alice believed that if he wanted to master magic and interact with wizardry, he should show the knight something special. It was truly a unique opportunity that was worth taking advantage of. For example, a knight could be shown the restoration of a magic sword. Smiling, the hero realized that, despite his 10 years, he could really cause surprise in this way. But the system warned that by staying here, he would simply waste his life and die if he did not demonstrate his strength. If he wants to succeed, he must prove himself and earn fame, because no one but him will determine his destiny. Sean was thinking at this time that a month had passed since their last conversation, and his mental strength could finally draw a magic circle. Without thinking twice, the brave boy agreed to restore the sword. A little later, having started training, he informed Alice that he had completed the task in just a few minutes. The AI system was amazed by his skill, as this time the drawing was fast and accurate, and it was a really great job. Having made up her mind, Alice asked the boy if he wanted to test the power of this magic. The stunned hero could not even imagine how this power could be used. The system reminded him that he should simply go outside and visualize this picture in his mind. The sooner the better, Alice cried, and Sean didn't understand why she was so anxious that he should try. Alice explained that she needed data on this magic, as this world was different from her original one, and she needed more information to create the perfect base. Without thinking, the guy said that he would try and ask what this magic was called. The system kindly informed him that this magic was called blade magic. After leaving the system world, Sean realized that he first needed to build a magic map. In his mind, he began to visualize the sword, which was broken and unusable. As soon as he began to imagine the magic sword, he felt his spiritual strength being greatly depleted. The ringing and drumming in his head did not stop. Suddenly, a bright light flashed in front of the guy, and he couldn't understand what was happening. It turned out that in this way he could control this power, and a magical aura appeared around him, which he also controlled. Unfortunately, his mental energy was practically at zero. Having created a magic ball in his hands, the hero raised his hands to the sky and used all his magic to release it. Something shocking happened, and Sean couldn't imagine that he had such power. A magical beam aimed at the ceiling pierced it, leaving a huge hole. The worried boy could not understand what kind of power it was, as the beam moved very quickly, and it seemed to him that it could be a deadly force of magic. He had little mental strength left, and it seemed that his abilities were still too weak, and he might have to put in more effort to master this magic. After logging in, Sean described how the test of his abilities went. The happy system wanted to know if he could pull off this trick, because the blade's magic power was not bad. Sean admitted that magic was indeed effective. He was even able to catch up with the eagle from the sand forest, although it was very dangerous. Based on the results of system tests and calculations, this magic provides many opportunities for improvement. That's why she asked for some time to develop an optimization plan for tomorrow. Hearing this, the hero immediately perked up because he learned that it was possible to improve this magic. This is indeed the case, and according to the principles of mechanics, the speed and destructive power of lead shot is significantly lower than that of a bullet. If you compress air to the same state as a bullet, you could probably increase its maximum power, Alice exclaimed. Realizing the power of this magic, Sean was truly amazed by such a serious result. Alice suggested that the guy draw a cross in front of the warhead so that it would look like a diffuser, and then the effect would be even better. Watching the system's actions, the hero realized that this teaching machine was really not so simple. Sometime later, events unfolded in a field where there was a huge log. The novice sorcerer easily pierced it with his magic, leaving a huge hole. Using his magical abilities, the boy made an incredibly powerful attack that he could not even dream of before. Knight Scott was already on his way and should arrive in a month, as he had other things to do, and thanks to the sewing training, his mental strength had become even stronger. The blade's magic has become much more powerful after Alice's improvements, and its use now requires much less magical energy. Suddenly, Ed decided to call the guy, since Knight Scott had already arrived. Many people gathered in the square in the city to greet the knight. Although there was no official order for the citizens to come out and greet him, everyone did so on their own initiative, and thanks to Knight Scott, they can all find enough food, and every citizen is grateful to him. The hero remembered the words of his father, who often said that Knight Scott was a good lord, and if he was good, then no one would face hunger in this place where excellent plants and vegetables grow. Villain began calling his students to come to him. Looking at the road, they waited for the arrival of the knights, as they were supposed to appear very soon. The guy began to look around the area to notice the knights who were supposed to appear in the city soon. With a strong expression of delight and admiration, Sean exclaimed that the knights had already arrived. It was true. Many knights on horseback began to enter the city. Ed deeply admired knights and dreamed of becoming one, but Sean was outraged by this idea, since the boy had previously aspired to become a high-ranking craftsman. The apprentice really wanted to become a craftsman, but he also felt that being a knight was also wonderful, and this made the boy laugh, as his honesty was too obvious. The blacksmith had been watching the arriving knights all this time and was hoping to see Scott. Suddenly, the Lord glanced at Willin, and their eyes met. They instantly ran towards each other, creating the impression that a fight was about to start. But in reality, this did not happen, and they simply greeted each other in this way. After that, they hugged each other because they were really happy to see each other. The knight was immensely happy that his friend Villain had come to meet him, which was obvious, and the blacksmith noticed that my lord had looked even better during this time. This time the Lord did not come empty-handed and decided to show Villain something special. The bag contained many damaged weapons and metal armor of the knights. It turned out that they had some problems along the way, but overall nothing serious. After handing over the armor and equipment to one of the students, the Lord announced that they planned to stay in the city for about half a month. The experienced blacksmith decided to tell the Lord about his students, since they were already experienced enough, and the next time the Lord visited the castle, he could take them with him. Scott couldn't believe these words and immediately thought that it was Ed, because he was one of the best students, and Willin confirmed this, saying that he had excellent skills and could successfully pass the exam for the title of novice craftsman. The milord immediately approached the young man and praised him, and first he would go to the castle, but upon his return he would definitely give him a shop. The guy was pleased with such praise, but responded that he did not need a shop. In fact, it was enough for him to be close to his master, because he was a very devoted student. Suddenly the knight's gaze turned to Sean, and the lord instantly noticed the new apprentice, and the blacksmith confirmed that this guy really did have great talent. The good-natured knight thanked the boy for coming to meet him and gave him some sweets to share with his friends. Scott then approached Willen as he was curious about the whereabouts of his student named Sean. Suddenly the lord realized that this boy was the same Sean, who was a skilled and capable blacksmith. The man was amazed to learn that this young man had the skill of forging, although he was still very young. These statements irritated the main character very much, but he endured it patiently. With a little awkwardness, the blacksmith admitted that the boy was indeed small, but his abilities were in no way inferior to Ed's. After the blacksmith's statement, the lord suggested conducting a trial in the forge to check his abilities. In any case, Scott had serious doubts that Sean would be able to lift a large hammer. The events unfolded in the forge, and the lord was shocked by what he saw, not believing his eyes. The little boy lifted the giant hammer with ease, and Scott was amazed at such an unusual skill. Coming closer, he decided to examine the boy's muscles and asked Sean if he was ready to follow him and learn from him to become a knight. Feeling awkward, the boy asked why the lord wanted him to become a knight, considering he had just addressed him as a child. The lord wanted this because of the boy's impressive strength, and strength is the foundation of a knight, and at such a young age, Sean is already so strong that he can definitely become a powerful knight. At the same time, the hero understood that his strength depended on daily training, and if he continued to train hard, he could become stronger than Knight Scott. Smiling, the man continued to talk about how there was nothing better in this world than becoming a knight, and after becoming a knight, your status would rise to nobility, and you only had to look at Scott's estate to understand how important this was. Suddenly someone exclaimed that this was impossible. Angry, Willen was against this, since Sean was his apprentice, already a good craftsman, and he was outraged that Scott was trying to make a knight out of him. Scott was also outraged by such a statement, since the noble profession of a knight cannot be compared with others, and as a blacksmith, he knew that many dream of becoming real knights. In protecting the boy, Willen shielded him, knowing that many knights lose their lives for various reasons. The noble lord exclaimed that if they did not go through pain and suffering, they would not be able to become true knights, and Scott is confident that with Sean's talent, he will definitely pass this test. A real war broke out between the two old acquaintances, and Sean realized that even if he had the opportunity to become their ally and get the land, he would still have to participate in this battle. In his past life, he only dreamed of a peaceful life, although the war was far away. But everyone knows how terrible it is. Now, having received a second chance from fate, he had to survive to live as long as possible. Bowing before the knight, Sean expressed his gratitude for the offer, but he is Master Valena's apprentice and is therefore forced to refuse. With a heavy sigh, Lord agreed, warning that if Sean ever changed his mind, he could always turn to him, and Willen was surprised that Sean did not strive for fame and glory, but simply dreamed of becoming a good craftsman. Laughing, the blacksmith ordered his children to show Knight Scott what they could do, and the boys were ready to demonstrate their real skills. Ed decided to be the first to show off his skills, and he bowed, turning to the Lord Knight, and in the limited time, he was going to demonstrate the rough handling of the heavy sword. The clever young man took the huge sword and prepared to work on it. First, he lit a fire in the oven and heated the sword. Immediately after this, he began to forge it with a huge hammer, processing the metal. After hitting the sword a few times, Ed began to cool it down using cold water. Within a few minutes, the rusty sword was transformed into a magnificent piece, completely ready for use. The skilled student completed this task with ease, and the result was truly impressive and, most importantly, very fast. The weight, balance, and even the sharpness of the sword were excellent. It could be used in combat, and Scott admitted that Willen was a worthy successor here, as the guy had talent and hard work. Turning to the blacksmith, the Lord offered him to take on a second apprentice, claiming that he already had a successor. Looking around, Willen still did not find his second disciple, who had just been nearby. It turned out that the smart guy was nearby and ready to demonstrate his skills. Bowing down, the boy announced that he was not going to hand over anything today, and the blacksmith decided to find out what he was going to do then. Laughing, Scott began to mock the guy, saying that if he was not as talented as Willen claimed, then he could forget about moving to the city. But what happened next really shocked the two seasoned masters of their craft, because it was today that the main character planned to restore the magic sword that was now in his hands. Looking at this sword, the Lord immediately realized that it was truly unusual. The worried blacksmith confirmed that it was indeed a magical sword. The frightened knight immediately began to ask the guy where he got this magical weapon. Smiling, Sean explained that his master had given him the blade. Shocked again, Scott turned to the blacksmith and asked if he could really create magical weapons, but Willen explained that the blade was given to him by his master. But it was a pity that this magic weapon was damaged, and he could not repair it. Lord was simply shocked by what he saw and could not believe his eyes. Everyone wanted to know if Sean could really restore the sword, but the guy just wanted to test his strength. At this moment, the master watched his student and reflected on his skills. This young man was absolutely confident in his abilities and was ready to go through the test. Having placed the sword in the furnace, he began to process it with fire in order to begin forging. Unfortunately, the flame was not powerful enough and there was too little heat. Coming closer, Willen asked Ed to give him a chance to help Sean. The experienced blacksmith relied on his apprentice and tried to do everything possible to restore the magic sword. The hero had done a lot of training in the virtual space, but he understood that everything would be fine, although restoring the magic weapon in reality was the first time for him. The color of the sword gradually began to change, indicating that the desired temperature had been reached. The next step was to use an unusual powder. Without understanding what the substance was, Willen asked what it was, and the boy explained that it was the remains of a magic book from which he had cut a piece. Not realizing how this was possible, the teacher was shocked because the magic book was very valuable, and he could not understand how this guy dared to do such a thing. In any case, without introducing a magical element, it would be impossible to use the power of the mental spirit on a magical weapon. Using his spiritual and magical energy, Sean began to act, doing everything possible to restore the blade. First, he channeled the power of the mental spirit into the magic sword, and it actually worked as the blade gradually began to undergo changes under the influence of magic. With the diagram in mind, Sean worked out the next steps of recovery. When the sword was taken out of the furnace, it glowed with a bright blue light, as if it was imbued with magic. The main character realized that his future would change dramatically from that moment on. The first blow was aimed straight at the sword, from which blue sparks began to pour out. While forging, the boy thought that he did not intend to stay here forever. After all, his goal was to move forward and master high-level magic. And all efforts are directed towards one goal: to become the strongest magician in the world. Faced with difficulties, the boy continued to forge the sword, losing a lot of strength in the process. There was a part blocking the flow of magic in the immediate vicinity, and the guy began to look for it right on the blade. It turned out that this part looked like a crack and needed to be fixed in order to fully use the magic sword. He used his mind to follow the flow of the magic sword, and then directed the power of the mental spirit. Using all these abilities, Sean literally sprinkled the sword with magical particles to restore it. In the blink of an eye, the crack that was on the sword disappeared, and there was no damage left on it. With a heavy sigh, the boy announced that the sword was finally ready and was now fully restored. Coming closer, the men were shocked that the young man had actually succeeded. The experienced blacksmith and knight could not believe their eyes, because Sean very quickly completed the restoration of this sword. With the help of his magical abilities, the hero sought to demonstrate the sword in action. The blinding light prevented both friends from seeing what had actually happened to the sword. The brave hero took the sword in his hands, intending to demonstrate its true abilities to everyone. The skilled youth exclaimed before the Lord Knight and Master, reporting that he had successfully restored this magical sword. Scott immediately felt the urge to pick up the sword, realizing that it was an impressive piece of art, and the sword shone as if it was radiating magic, but it was a shame that he only knew how to handle a sword and didn't have any magic. The Lord approached the blacksmith to find out what Mr. Professional thought about this, but Willen asked him not to mock him. In fact, by the standards of craftsmen, Sean had already shown outstanding talents and was even able to restore the magic sword. The tearful master admitted that his student had done an excellent job, and that Sean's technique reminded him of the departed master. However, the teacher wanted to know if the sword was capable of releasing magic, and Sean confidently assumed that it should work and handed over the magic core. As soon as the magic core was placed on the sword, it instantly began to shine with an incredible light. The owner of this magic sword can freely control it when the energy of the magic core is sufficient, and the sword is able to use edge magic, and the recovery time is about 30 seconds. Using this sword, Villain was shocked by what happened next, and he literally screamed in horror. The man accidentally activated the sword, releasing a magical beam that moved rapidly in an unknown direction. The magic beam passed through the thick wall of the workshop, demonstrating its enormous power. After this, the beam destroyed everything in its path, even trees in the immediate vicinity. For the masters, this skill was astonishing, and they froze, not knowing what to say. Smiling, the young man wanted to ask the master if he had passed the test. A frightened Scott didn't know what to answer and simply thanked fate for having such a master. Coming closer, the master began to praise the guy and say that he really passed the test, and Sean is simply incredible. The blacksmith, knowing a little more than the others, asked Sean if the inserted magic core meant that he had already mastered magic. Embarrassed, the young man admitted that this was indeed the case, and the Lord was amazed that the boy could use magic. Since he has mastered magic, according to the country's rules, Sean can join the magic tower for training. Continuing to play at ignorance, the boy asked what kind of magic tower it was, although in fact he had known about it for a long time. The magic tower was truly unique, and there weren't many magicians in their country, but there was an honorary 5-star magician and 5 others, each with their own magic tower. Since the guy is a citizen of the country, he has the opportunity to become a magician and get his own magic tower to teach magic. Even Villain didn't expect that the guy had not only skill in crafts, but also talent in magic. Sadly realizing that he would now have to leave his master, Villain knew that Sean had really tried, and the master was proud of him, and so he would respect whatever the hero chose. The knight also warned Sean to think carefully about the offer. A craftsman or a mage whose profession is more respected, which has a better future, and Sean, looking at his blade, exclaimed that he would really think carefully about his choice. Suddenly the boy noticed that the Lord was showing special interest in the sword, constantly looking at it. Smart and resourceful, the young man asked the Lord if he would like to try out the sword, and Scott happily agreed to such an offer. The sword's power was impressive, and Scott laughed in admiration and felt proud that he was given the opportunity to wield such a powerful weapon. Waving it around, the man imagined himself fighting an invisible enemy and winning. No one expected the Lord to have such a sense of humor, as he usually displayed seriousness. The embarrassed Lord noticed that he was being watched and asked to stop, but despite this, 3 days later Scott invited Sean to go with him to the castle. Frightened but amazed by the offer, Sean agreed, realizing that this was a great opportunity for him to study magic. At that time, he didn't even imagine that everything would happen so quickly and that he would become a magician. The joyful Lord had already begun to hurry the boy, telling him to pack his things, since in 3 days they were leaving for Lewis's castle. Remembering this, the boy realized that he needed to return home and share this news with his father. This was no problem for them, and together with Scott, they went to see their father, who was looking forward to meeting them. After some time, the boy returned to the village to his father, and the man was amazed that the knight was walking next to him. The son brought with him the knight Scott, a brave warrior, a man who saved entire cities. Knight Scott invited Joey's father and aunt to the mansion, which caused quite a shock in the village, and Sean and his father became the main topic of conversation among the villagers. Alice suggested to Mr. Scott that he demonstrate his talent for magic, and when the plan succeeded, she was delighted. The forge staff couldn't come to terms with him leaving, and Sean saw Master Willen cry for the first time, and he gave him his hammer as a keepsake, but the hero apparently doesn't intend to use it in the future. As a person who came to this world, he was a stranger here, but after spending so much time with them, the boy couldn't just leave. Looking into the distance, the guy promised himself something he had long dreamed of. Namely, that he will definitely become the best magician. Events continued to develop despite the downpour that had been going on for 3 days now. All the travelers were extremely exhausted, as the nearest city was still far away, and that is why they decided to stop to rest at least a little. After setting up their tents, Sean and his team decided to take a short break. The knight asked the boy how he felt going out of town for the first time, and Sean replied that he was very tired. It turned out that they had 5 days of driving ahead of them, and so they needed to take a little rest, and gradually the guy would adapt and get used to such stress. Sean asked my lord why he didn't take off his armor, as if he never got tired, and it turned out that Scott still had to patrol, and he had been wearing this armor for 20 years and was used to it. As Scott was getting ready to leave on patrol, the guy decided to stop him and say something important. Sean expressed gratitude to Scott for his care and protection, offering to give him his magic sword as a token of his appreciation. This proposal made the knight blush, because he did not expect such a noble gesture from the young man. However, Scott refused the gift, explaining that it was his duty to protect the citizens and accompany Sean, and this was the law of the land, and his responsibility and duty, and the magic sword was too valuable, and Sean should keep it. It turned out that this was a test, since the hero had previously considered the knight Scott to be unreliable, and he just wanted to test him, and he did not expect that this man would be as honest as a knight should be. In any case, as a token of gratitude, the guy again offered to accept the sword, and since he is a craftsman, he knows how to restore magical weapons and create them. Moreover, he is to become a magician, and his chosen weapon will be a wand, and this sword is more suitable for a knight, which he explained. Scott decided to accept this gift and was amazed by the guy's generosity, and he decided to take good care of this magical sword. After Sean masters his new skills, he wants to infuse some magic into his armor, and Scott agrees to the upgrade and goes on patrol, asking the guy to rest and not to bother him. Events developed late at night. The main character lay on his bed, immersed in virtual reality. While mastering new magical skills, Alice suddenly began to call her master. The guy, not suspecting anything bad, wanted to know what was going on, and Alice told him that it was time to wake up, as she felt the presence of someone outside his tent, who, apparently, wanted to kill him. Taking off his virtual reality glasses, the hero felt the villain enter the tent. The clever boy immediately pulled out the hammer that had been given to him earlier. Looking at his enemy, Sean knew he wasn't going to lie there silently. And he decided to resist, and grabbing a hammer, he began to attack. The villain was not an easy one and easily repelled the main character's attack, defending himself with his own hands. Sean and the stranger's eyes met, and the villain continued to watch the guy with a sinister look and tried to kill him. Watching this villain, the guy realized that he had never seen this man before. Continuing to attack, the killer began to use his blades attached to his hands. With deft movements, the villain began to use magical abilities directly on the blades, and his hands succumbed to magic. The worried young man realized that he had no way to resist, but then he remembered something, and he began to use morning exercises, in particular stretching, thanks to which he avoided a strong blow. This really surprised the villain, because he didn't expect such a small guy to be able to dodge so deftly. Even though the hero didn't know whether this man was a spy or someone else, he still had to be eliminated. Suddenly, one of the villain's eyes began to glow red, and his intentions were clearly hostile. Having avoided a blow from the protagonist, the killer jumped up, preparing to attack from behind to finish what he started. Feeling this, Sean realized his helplessness in this situation and did not know how to avoid a serious blow. Turning around, the young man wanted to continue the fight, but he became confused as he did not know what to do next. The guy was overcome by a strange feeling, as if he could sense the aura of death that was very close. Gathering his last strength, Sean was not willing to give up easily and was not going to die here. In connection with this, the hero decided to use all his magical abilities, which he had studied for so long. With just a thought, the boy recreated a bullet that literally floated in the air. So he fired an imaginary bullet created using magic. This proved effective, and the villain was neutralized, unable to continue the fight. Feeling very anxious, Sean couldn't believe what had just happened, as if it was a dream. Looking at his hands, he realized that he had taken the life of an unknown person. At this time, strange sounds were heard from the camp, and everyone rushed to the tent. Knight Scott decided to look inside to find out what had happened. Upon entering, he found a young man lying on the floor and an unknown person invading his tent. The hero seemed out of his mind, and he took up his hammer, ready to defend himself. Luckily, Scott reacted in time to prevent Sean from hitting him, although he was shocked by what was happening. The man tried to calm the boy down, assuring him that everything was okay. Bursting into tears, Sean told Mr. Scott that he had killed someone. The guy was completely confused about the reasons for what happened, and the villain simply entered his tent with the obvious intention of killing him. And in a panic, Sean used magic, since he could not cope with the attacker. Perhaps someone felt resentment towards Sean, since someone clearly wanted to kill him. Scott suddenly admitted that he had to apologize, since the killer had probably come to kill him. The experienced knight already suspected who had sent this man, aimed at killing him. The killer attacked the young man because Scott allowed him to stay in his tent. This greatly surprised the boy, as he did not understand who could hate Scott so much as to seek his death. The knight hesitated and didn't know whether to share this information with Sean. So he asked Sean how big he thought Scott's territory was, considering he had seen his property and territory. The hero said that the territory was indeed vast, and his father claimed that together with a neighboring farm, it could accommodate thousands of people. Turning around, the Lord suggested going out into the fresh air, preferable to staying next to the dead man. Continuing the conversation, Scott remarked that Sean probably found it strange that an unadorned knight owned such vast holdings, and it was unknown how he maintained them. Looking at the sky, they agreed that it was indeed beautiful and expressed hope for good weather. It turned out that 50 years ago, Scott's land was a wasteland and unsuitable for agriculture. Then his father, a brilliant knight, brought his family and the townspeople to this site. After his father's hard work, they finally established their own estate. The young man wondered if the Lord had said the land was not suitable for growing crops. Then how had his father achieved reclamation? The Lord looked at the boy and told him that the secret was in magic, but Sean had to keep this information a secret for the sake of their family. All this was possible thanks to magic. Hearing this, Sean was shocked because he did not expect that magic could make the land fertile. Previously, his father was a subordinate of Count Kempert, and the Count begged the great mage Tishoni to use magic to change the quality of the soil. At that time, Earl Kempert commissioned the boy's father to test this method on the land, and after 10 years of hard work by his father and the people of the estate, some success was finally achieved. The young man was truly amazed by this, because it all started with such a small thing, and his father said that now they could be considered a food reserve for the entire country. Scott laughed and admitted that his father was so dedicated to the estate and so knowledgeable that it was no wonder he was able to raise such a talented heir. Some people were jealous of such success and tried to kill Scott to take over his land. The witty guy decided to clarify whether those who are inside their country are enemies. This was confirmed. This was knowledge they could not ignore. Knowledge showed excessive greed. Not limiting themselves to just eyes on these lands, they sought to attribute all the achievements to themselves, and after unsuccessful attempts to acquire these lands, they resorted to other methods. The boy realized that these people were probably not just content with weak successes, they wanted to swallow up all the lands. After some thought, Sean decided to ask the Lord why not seek help from Earl Kempert, since they had come here on his orders. But everything turned out to be not so simple, since in their country the lower knowledge is obliged to maintain relations and pay taxes to the higher knowledge, and since the higher knowledge is obliged to protect the lower knowledge. Surely, if Earl Kempert had lived, Scott would not have had to worry about this problem. With interest, the young man decided to find out what happened after the death of Earl Kempert and who became his heir. Earl Kempert had been a respected tutor to the Duke of Warrington, and yet, after his departure, Earl Fraser, Kempert's son, was too weak to influence the Duke of Warrington's decisions. Sean quickly realized that losing the Earl's support meant that the nobles in higher positions would attack their subjects and rob the knights of their merit. However, this must remain a secret, as the revelation that someone is trying to seize the lands will lead to the rapid intervention of other nobles. Sometimes Scott thought about leaving and leading a normal life, but as a lord, he has to protect not only his family, but also the inhabitants of his territory. In that case, the young man had a question. Why doesn't the Lord simply transfer these territories to the nobles? In fact, this will not be enough for them, and they want to know the cultivation method. And if the great mage Tishoni finds out that his family has passed this method on to someone else, it can cause serious problems. Standing on his feet, the hero exclaimed that everything was quite simple. After he visits the magic tower, he can ask the great mage Tishoni to protect him. These words really inspired the knight, and he was amazed that the guy was ready to take such a step. This is not a problem for him, because his enemy will not dare to insult the great mage Tishoni, who is one of the 6 great mages. And if Tishoni doesn't want to help, then they will simply ask him to become their support, and this will solve any problem. But Scott still couldn't understand why the great mage should care about an insignificant knight, given his high status in the country compared to the Duke. Suddenly the boy told the Lord that he had learned magic on his own, using a magic book that Master Villain had given him. So the opportunity to master magic in such a short time attracted him. The knight was truly perplexed and could not understand why Sean was doing so much for him. After a little thought, the guy himself could not understand why he was doing this. Then he smiled and said that he was just a good person and wanted to help. The embarrassed man threw up his hands and hurried to approach the young man, touching his shoulders. Immediately after this, Scott, who has strength and courage, could not hold back his tears, seeing in Sean not just a boy, but a kind and wonderful person. The Lord also could not hold back his tears from these manifestations of mercy, realizing that in the end all his actions were done for his own good. The restless Lord felt useless, forced to use the little boy for his protection. However, he had to wipe away his tears because everyone connected to this world, his loved ones and friends, were in the estate. The hero didn't want them to become victims in the Cold War. Looking at the sky, the guy noticed that it was already getting light, and this meant that it was time to get ready and move on. As soon as day came, the knights immediately set off towards the city. A week had passed since the incident with the killer, and according to the plan, they should have already been close to Lewis's castle. After entering the castle, the situation may become more secure. Luckily, they had almost reached their destination, and the castle was visible to the naked eye. The remarkable Lewis Castle was clearly visible to the travelers, thanks to its grandeur, visible even from afar. The smart guy decided to find out from the Lord how many people live in this castle. After thinking for a moment, the knight replied that 2 years ago there were about 100,000 inhabitants here, and now there are probably even more. This really surprised the young man, because he did not expect that there could be so many people in the castle. In fact, it was more like a town than a castle, but the dukes named it Lewis Castle in honor of Lewis, and since then the town has expanded tenfold, and no restoration has been done here. It was really surprising for the guy, although at first he didn't understand why they were heading to the castle. The city was really noisy, so the castle looked more like a city. Of course, compared to the world of his previous life, this town was more suitable for peaceful life. Stopping his horse, Scott exclaimed that they would stop here now. Entering the bar, the knight immediately greeted his old friend Butler. The people sitting at the bar did not recognize the man, and the atmosphere around him seemed tense and hostile, as if they were not particularly happy about his appearance. Scott was shocked that he didn't see any familiar faces in the crowd, and everyone in the room was a stranger to him. The only one who recognized the knight was the bartender, and his face expressed surprise at the unexpected visit. The joyful man began to greet his old friend Butler, reaching out to embrace him with outstretched arms. But suddenly the old friend did not give in to such treatment and was preparing for a fight. The bartender, on the other hand, was determined and swung a powerful blow in an attempt to defeat the knight. However, the clever lord turned out to be not so simple and easily avoided the bartender's intended blow. In response to the next blow, the old friend skillfully blocked it, showing his skills in combat. Luckily, it was all just part of a joke, and instead of a real confrontation, they decided to just say hello to each other. The friends were delighted with the meeting. 3 whole years passed, and now they were together again. The hero was simply amazed by this sight, realizing that they not only knew each other, but were also having fun, fooling around, and Ed, in turn, was delighted to meet Uncle Butler. Sean was surprised that Ed knew this man, and Butler, an old friend of my Lord and Master Willen, turned out to have known him since childhood, and there was a strong relationship between them, and Sean exclaimed, expressing his surprise. The knight smiled and shouted that this was his old friend from childhood. They had always been inseparable, and he shared that he was Butler's best friend. The man was amazed at how much Ed had grown, and this time he came to the castle to check on the budding craftsman, Butler reasoned. It was quite fitting, as Willen had trained an excellent student, which was evident in his physical form and muscles. Looking at the boy, Butler immediately thought that this was probably Scott's grandson, and he had a hard time understanding who it could be. My lord decided to introduce a boy named Sean, the son of one of the farmers on his property, and he has a talent for magic and is eager to enter the magic tower for training. Butler looked at Sean with interest and asked if he really had talent in magic, and while the hero realized that he would probably be doubted again. Suddenly, the man started laughing, amazed that there was a mage apprentice in this room, and it was really impressive since there were many talented people in the manor. The good-natured man invited the travelers to rest and leave their luggage with him, so that he could bring it inside. Sometime later, Scott shared his story with a friend, telling how they got here, realizing that their enemy's patience had run out. The worried bartender, realizing that the enemies had gone too far, wondered if anything else suspicious had happened after that. Scott replied that the murder was a final warning from their enemies. Then the friend decided to find out Scott's plans, fearing for his life, and if this situation continued, he was worried about Lord. That's why Scott sends Sean to the magic tower, and if the guy succeeds and becomes the magician's apprentice, perhaps no one will dare to threaten him and his territory. The bartender, looking at the night, wanted to know what would happen if Sean failed, and all hope seemed to rely on the boy. In any case, Scott needs to protect his territory because it is their home and he will not allow it to be destroyed by anyone. Events unfolded the next day, and Sean wanted to know from my lord when the magical association would respond to their letters sent to him yesterday. It turned out that the magic tower would probably only receive this letter in 3 days. Frustrated by the slow delivery, the hero suggested using the magic of the passing wind, which maybe deliver objects. The knight also informed Ed that the answer to his craftsman's test should come very quickly, in just 7 days, and this would give him the opportunity to prepare and pass the exam successfully. Sometime later, events continued to develop in the city. Looking around, Ed was amazed at the variety of interesting things in the city, while Sean continued to be amazed that in his previous life he had not had to go outside for many years. The blacksmith's apprentice's attention was suddenly drawn to a street vendor, and he wondered why they were still in Lewis's castle. Scott explained that no matter the city, there will always be street vendors, and you just have to be attentive and lucky to sometimes find something valuable. Watching the knight and Ed, Sean assumed they were there to reminisce about old times and share their adventures. Looking at the street vendor, the boy noticed something unusual. On the cloth with various goods lay an unusual metal object, very reminiscent of magic. This item immediately caught the attention of the protagonist, and he decided that he wanted to buy it. Perhaps this was the key to further study of magic. Running up to the Lord, Sean began to call him, hoping for help. With a displeased look, they told the Lord what they had seen and asked if he could buy them the item. This was not difficult for the Lord, and he agreed to buy the item. Approaching the street vendor, the stranger did not understand why so many people were approaching him. Meanwhile, Sean had already started rummaging through things, looking for the necessary item. The good-natured merchant approached the boy, asking what he was looking for, because the toys were sold on another street. Smiling, the boy decided to ask the merchant what kind of item it was. The cunning merchant immediately realized that the boy really needed this item. Looking at the knight, the seller also realized that he could raise the price. The shameless man smiled and shouted that this treasure was worth its money. Secretly, he said that he had discovered this while exploring the ruins and had achieved it through long efforts. It was real, painstaking work. When meeting a stranger, Scott decided to ask him the cost of the item. Raising his finger, the man exclaimed that he would ask for only 1 gold coin for this item. Just 1 gold coin, and they can take possession of all these treasures. The knight, feeling disappointed, began to drag the merchant towards him. With a glint of glee in his eyes, Scott declared that he was deceiving the boy, had no conscience, and for just 5 silver coins they would have everything or leave. Thus, only 5 silver coins were spent on all the treasures. All of the merchant's goods were purchased, and Sean was delighted with this. An alarmed Ed wanted to know from Sean what he was going to buy, because all these things were worth more than just 5 silver coins, and the seller had clearly deceived them. Scott thought the money spent was a small change, and everything would be fine, even though 5 silver coins meant a whole month's work in the forge. Turning around, the young man decided to ask Ed to try to guess what exactly he intended to buy from all this. Handing over the book, the guy assumed that this was what Sean wanted to buy, but he was wrong. He then pointed to another item, and although it didn't seem like a piece of a powerful weapon, it was still worth something and was of excellent quality, although in the end it was just iron. Ed sighed heavily, still eager to find out what exactly the guy was going to buy, and didn't want to solve this mystery any longer. The smart guy suggested that Ed come closer, since no one else should hear their conversation. As soon as the blacksmith's apprentice approached, the hero immediately told him what exactly he intended to buy. This really amazed the young man, because he could not believe that such a thing was sold on the street. Sean and Scott quickly shut him up as Ed started talking too much. Admitting his guilt, Ed apologized for shouting loudly, and after that, everyone headed back to the hostel to rest a little and examine that very object. After looking at the item, the men began to try to figure out if this was really what Sean wanted. It turned out that in front of Sean were two magical iron plates, which he had acquired for next to nothing. The astonished friend decided to clarify how confident Sean was in their magical properties. These plates truly looked magical, with exquisite patterns on their surface. The guy was absolutely sure that they contained magical information, and he sought to explore it. Scott was amazed by such an act, considering the young man too mysterious for this world. Ed, the blacksmith, decided to ask Sean how much he paid for these magical iron plates. It turned out that everything related to magic is difficult to value in money, and if someone agrees to sell their magic tower, its value can reach at least 100 gold coins. The amount shocked the guy, because he didn't expect that ordinary pieces of iron could cost 200 gold coins. The knight noticed the guy's envious look and hastened to get rid of him, insisting that he needed to prepare for the exam and not interfere. Meanwhile, the hero realized that their real value was much higher than 100 gold coins, because he felt the flow of magical energy and was curious about what information or mental training method might be contained in this. In any case, it was necessary to use the magical power of the mind to find out what was hidden on these plates. Having used his magical abilities, the hero was amazed by what he saw on the magic plate. In horror, he threw her away and began to scream in pain and horror. The boy became short of breath and his vision darkened. Suddenly his heart began to hurt, as if he was having a heart attack. Sean collapsed to the floor in pain, not understanding what this feeling was, and his head was splitting and his heart was breaking. For further exploration, he needs to enter the virtual space so that Alice can help him solve this mystery. With all his might, the boy tried to call Alice to help him in this difficult situation. The worried system responded immediately, promising to help its owner and urging him to log in as quickly as possible. His body was heating up, his breathing was becoming more and more frequent, and his heart was literally breaking. And this time the owner was clearly rushing things, Alice thought. Before he could use his mental powers, he needed to give her the opportunity to scan those magic plates. The moment he used his mental spirit power to touch the magic plate, Sean felt like he was being sucked in, and all of his mental energy was sucked into the plate. This was expected, since he underestimated his strength, and what happened was a result of a lack of mental energy of the spirit, and any mistake could cost him his life. Fear gripped the guy. He realized that what happened could have ended in his death. Alice decided to explain in a different form, and the mental power of the spirit is the magical essence of this world. One might say, its soul. If all the mental strength of the spirit was sucked out, it was equivalent to losing the soul, turning into a zombie without the ability to think, and the girl did not know whether life would be preserved. Fortunately, the hero reacted quickly, and everything ended well. He remained alive. Sean then decided to check with the system when he would be able to study these two iron plates. These plates apparently contain something of a high level, and with his current mental power of the spirits, he will not be able to comprehend the contents, and it will require about another 10 years of training for him to do so. Turning around, the guy was deeply upset, but Alice began to calm him down, reminding him that time should pass unnoticed for him. Suddenly, the guy remembered what Alice had said earlier about her ability to sense murderous intent. It was indeed her ability to store information, but the hero could not understand how this was possible because the data in her storage had been destroyed. It turned out that the main information was destroyed, but the special information remained, and unfortunately, the system could not tell about it, since he still would not understand the content of the special information. After some thought, the hero realized that he was really interested, but Alice did not understand why he suddenly asked about it. The reason was his desire to learn to sense murderous intent, and Sean decided to ask the system if it could help him with this. Confused, the system chose to remain silent, simply looking at the guy. The hero was outraged by this, and he could not understand why Alice was silent, and in turn, the girl wanted to ask why he needed to learn to sense the intent to kill. With his head down, the guy explained that after the encounter with the killer, he felt defenseless. The virtual space provided him with immortality, but in the real world, he was just an ordinary person. The last time, if it weren't for Alice's words, he would have left without knowing exactly how he died. This is why he cannot rely on her to always warn him, and for his own safety, he needs to learn to sense killing intent. Worried, Alice agreed, because the hero himself made this decision. It was true. The determined guy was ready for action. Opening the door, Alice pointed to it and asked the hero to go through this test. As part of this test, she was also given a flashlight so that Sean could look around. The slightly frightened boy was curious about what was hidden behind this door, and yet he had to go in and find out for himself. Entering the room, he noticed that it was dark and the emptiness felt endless. On the sides, the hero literally felt that someone was next to him. In the darkness, footsteps were heard approaching the guy. Feeling very scared, Sean couldn't tell who was in the room or why they were approaching him. There was darkness all around, and no one was visible, and it seemed as if no one was there. The guy didn't understand what kind of place this was and why the system sent him here. Looking around, Sean felt a chill run through his body, but he couldn't figure out why. The assassin's axe, raised from behind, was aimed at him to deliver a crushing blow. Turning around, the guy noticed at the last moment that an attempt had been made on his life and became scared. Luckily, the agile guy dodged the powerful blow and gathered his strength to pass the test. Enraged, Sean asked the attacker how he dared to attack from behind and decided to use bullet magic. It turned out that magic could not be used here, and he was practically defenseless. The axe-wielding killer approached, ready to finish what he had started. The deadly villain continued to approach the protagonist, ready to use his death axe. Luckily, the boy noticed that there was a house ahead where he could hide. As he entered the house, he thought that this would temporarily stop his pursuer, and this thought frightened him, and perhaps there was something in this house that he could use as a weapon. The things in the room looked truly creepy. There was an old TV with static on the screen nearby. Someone addressed the boy through the TV, greeting him and offering to play a game. At that very second, the cabinet began to move as if someone was inside it. Suddenly, they started knocking down the door from behind with an axe, and the tip was already visible through the wood. The killer, with a menacing look, told the boy that he had finally found him. Sometime later, the guy finally came to his senses. The system was extremely glad that its owner had finally woken up and remained alive. Without understanding anything, Sean wanted to know what happened in this test and what happened to him. All this happened because of his desire to learn to sense killing intent, and so the system sent him to the training room. Alice, looking at the guy, did not know how everything went and wanted to ask the owner if his ability to sense murderous intent had improved. The frightened guy could not give a clear answer because he himself did not know and wanted to understand why he needed to undergo such tests in order to learn to sense the intent to kill. It's simple, and if he wants to learn to sense someone else's murderous intent and hidden hostility, he has to go through this test. That is why he needs to experience them in a terrible and dangerous environment. Not knowing if it would really help, Sean wanted to know how effective this method was. It was true. Over 100 billion reports confirm that when a person experiences a fear scene, their senses are heightened and they begin to understand when danger is approaching. Confused, the boy suggested that such an ordeal could harm him. But that was a lie, and according to the system, all federal service members undergo similar tests before entering the army, and none of them end in death. Upon hearing this, Sean immediately wanted to know what the federal level was and how many troops were there. The federal troops were from the Milky Way galaxy, but the shared data had been destroyed, so the system knew nothing. Getting to his feet, the hero was about to go train, but the system dissuaded him, indicating that he probably needed to rest. The determined guy assured that he was fine. And he needs to strike while the iron is hot, because the sooner he learns to sense murderous intent, the sooner he can guarantee his safety. The worried girl again tried to persuade the owner not to go, but the guy did not listen and entered the room. It was later discovered that no one died after this test, but more than half went mad, and since the owner did not ask about it, perhaps he did not want to know. Events developed further 5 days later, when Knight Scott received a reply letter from the Duke. The letter brought great joy to the man, and he was eagerly awaiting to read what was written there. Having gone up to the guy's room, Scott decided to knock on the door, since the magic tower responded to his letter. With a heavy sigh, the knight realized that the boy was still sleeping. He immediately began to wake the young man, reminding him that it was already morning and time to get up. Suddenly, Sean threw the blanket aside, accidentally covering the man. Then, using his magical abilities, he wanted to find out who woke him up, and when he realized it was Scott, he asked not to kill him, explaining that he was not a murderer. At this point, the boy apologized, thinking it was someone else, and now, with his new ability to sense killing intent, he could sense it approaching even in his sleep. Scott decided to joke and said that they would forget about this incident, after which he told about the fact that the magic tower responded to his letter. Sean was glad, because in front of him stood a magician ready to test his magical talents. In anticipation, the boy asked when they could go to the magic tower, and the Lord pleased him by saying that they would go there right away. After some time, the guy asked the Lord why the magic tower was located outside the city, and Scott explained that magic is a special caste of people who are looking for a place where they can calmly study magic. Regardless of everything, they were about to arrive, and the knight decided to show the guy that the magic tower was very close. And this was true, because until the very moment of arrival at the majestic magical tower, there was nothing left, and it seemed huge, standing on the outskirts of the city, and it was not surprising that it was built outside the city walls. The distance between the city and the magic tower was negligible for the wizards, and even if the city was attacked by the enemy, the magicians could teleport the necessary resources and prevent magical experiments that could affect the city. The magician standing at the entrance to the tower reported that the travelers had arrived just in time. The emotionless man looked at the guy and recognized him as that very Mr. Sean. It turned out that this person had an energy wave, although it looked a little dim. Bowing his head, the knight decided to leave Sean, thanking him for the hospitality in the magic tower and the opportunity to show himself to the young man. Good-natured Scott wished the hero good luck and success in passing the exam. Together, they waved goodbye. Suddenly, the magician's apprentice asked the boy if they could go, and Sean answered in the affirmative. And so, they continued their journey to the magic tower, and the hero was delighted with the opportunity to finally get here. Looking around, the young man was amazed by every magical artifact that was in the tower. Looking at the guy, Sean realized that he was very silent and, as far as one could judge, preferred to avoid unnecessary conversations, and so Sean decided not to try to start conversation. Climbing up to the second floor, the guy noticed many small rooms emitting magical waves, and some ways were even more powerful than the guy's own. Stopping on the 5th floor, they both felt that their goal had been achieved. The magician's apprentice knocked on the door, and the hero understood that he would finally meet his teacher. The determined young man was ready to learn all the secrets of art from a true magician. Upon entering, the student told Sean that Mo Long was the examiner and owner of the Magic Tower, as well as one of the great magicians in the country. Mo Long was known for his incredible strength and magical expertise. Looking at the magician, the hero felt incredible excitement, and he had never seen such magicians before. His magical aura was emitting super powerful energy, creating a feeling of incredible pressure, which is exactly how a true magician should manifest himself. Coming closer, Mo Long decided to check with the guy if his name was really Sean. Their eyes met, and the boy felt a strong sense of excitement, not anticipating what would happen next, while the man remained unperturbed, standing calmly. Taking a deep breath, the teacher prepared to say a few words to the boy. Turning away, he said that the guy, of course, had magical talent, but there were certain subtleties. These subtleties were that his talent was the lowest among all the magic students, and even with diligent training, it would be difficult for him to become an official magician. However, given the rarity of magical talent, if a guy has the aspiration, he can stay in the magic tower in the outer forest, do homework, learn the methods of training the spirit, and gradually develop. Once he reaches adulthood, he will be able to master basic magic, which will be enough to earn a living. The guy reluctantly believed these words and had no idea what awaited him. After just the first meeting, the magician said such things based only on his own view. While reading the information about the hero, Mo Long wanted to know who wrote about him. The alarmed boy announced that it was Knight Scott who was responsible for this information. Mo Long sighed heavily again and was at a loss as to how a knight who was renowned for his honesty could provide false information. A frightened Sean asked what exactly Knight Scott had written, and it turned out that the guy had already mastered magic. Mo Long couldn't understand how this was possible, given the weakness of his mental spirit, and comprehending magic seemed impossible. Gathering his strength, Sean decided to demonstrate that Knight Scott was not lying. This turn of events really shocked the man. Now the teacher realized that Sean really did have magical powers. However, unfortunately, he was only proficient in this spell and not in any other. Looking closely at the guy, the man wanted to know what he meant, as if he knew some other spell. This was true, but the hero admitted that he had not yet fully mastered this skill. After Alice analyzed the acid spell, he never started using it because he spent most of his time feeling the intent to kill. As he got closer, the teacher determined that it seemed to be wind magic, and Sean finally realized that Mo Long had taken an interest in him. Smiling, the guy said that he had learned a wind magic spell, namely bullet magic. Suddenly, Mo Long suggested testing his bullet magic on him, but this made the boy uneasy. He didn't want to do this because the force of one shot could kill the teacher. Pointing to the table, the teacher asked to use his magical abilities on it. Bowing before Mo Long, the hero was about to demonstrate his spell. But the teacher warned that this table was made of solid wood, reinforced with magic, and it was very durable. Suddenly, the main character decided to demonstrate his magical ability by using it on the table. To Mo Long, this skill was truly impressive, and he couldn't believe his eyes. The magic was quite impressive, and the teacher was shocked by what he saw. Having calmed down a bit, Mo Long decided to ask Sean if the destructive power of his bullet magic was really supposed to be that strong. Feeling awkward, the boy couldn't understand if he had done something wrong, because he couldn't tell him that his magic had been changed by artificial intelligence. Shaking his head, the teacher explained that his spell was very different from others like it, had a more powerful force, and overall, it was really impressive, so he wanted to know where he learned this spell. Handing over the magic book, the boy said that his master was a craftsman, claiming that it was a magic book. Not believing what he heard, Mo Long asked again if he had really studied what was written in this book himself. Looking at the guy, the man felt something suspicious. Coming closer, he shouted that Sean was lying and this couldn't be happening. Having started to justify himself, the hero was very nervous and said that he was not lying, although the master felt from the book of records that he was holding that his bullet magic was not there. It was really interesting, and the master noticed the change in the spell, although it was stated differently in the book, but the hero was able to rethink it. Hearing this, the master again could not believe that an ordinary student was able to change the spell. It took some time before Sean decided to share the full story of his training with Mo Long, seeking to show exactly how he had mastered magic. With a heavy sigh, the teacher realized that the boy had used the book of records to restore the magic weapon. With a smile, Sean explained that he had studied the book carefully and used it to repair his weapons. These words shocked the master, because the guy's arguments were so well-founded that it was difficult to even object to them. Continuing to think, the hero decided to ask the magician Mo Long if he had done everything right. Everything was actually true, but the teacher didn't expect such courage from the young man, and so he decided to find out if he could use the spell again. After thinking for a moment, the hero declared that he could not do this, since his mental strength of spirit allowed him to release magic only once. Mo Long then expressed surprise, claiming that his spiritual power was so weak that it did not allow him to fully master magic, and the question remained as to how he managed to learn it under such conditions. This was highly suspicious, as his skill in releasing magic was honed to near perfection, as if he had trained tens of thousands of times. In every attempt to release magic, one must visualize in one's mind and use the magical energy of the spirit to form an image of the magic and direct the flow of energy, and every time, whether success or failure, one must use the power of the mental spirit to create magic. In such a situation, in order to wield magic, the power of the mental spirit must be significantly higher than that required to release magic 10 or even 100 times. The bullet magic he used seemed to be created instantly, and it was not just the result of dozens of training, and given the level of his mental strength, it would take several years or even more of dedicated practice of a single spell to achieve such mastery. Their eyes met again, and Sean didn't know what to say in this situation or how to justify himself. The teacher realized that the student had no intention of sharing his experience no matter what, but he still saw his abilities and decided that Sean could stay here. The worried young man agreed with the teacher, making up an excuse and trying to hide the truth. Looking away into the distance, Mo Long turned to Sean as he had just thought of something. It turned out that the teacher decided to ask Sean if he wanted to become his student. The stunned guy couldn't believe what he heard and didn't even know what to answer. He suddenly exclaimed, confirming his desire to become Mo Long's disciple. Thus, the hero became the official disciple of the great magician, and in his eyes there glimmered hopes for future amazing possibilities. Feeling his moment, the hero fully agreed with the master and was ready to act. At this time, another disciple entered the room, and Mo Long instructed him to take Sean to the 7th floor, declaring that from now on he would be his disciple. While walking through the tower, the hero noticed that a new student named Danny had become more polite after he became the mage's apprentice. Sometime later they reached a room that was still empty, and the hero was free to stay there. Danny was extremely considerate, addressing the hero as Mr. Sean, and he offered to help him with any needs, be it food, shower, or clothing of his choice, and he also offered the opportunity to order any dish he wanted. In recognition of the student, Sean also addressed him as Mr. Danny and expressed his gratitude for his kindness. Confused, Danny noted that he could just be called Danny, since he was just an assistant that the mage Mo Long had allowed to stay here and study. Surprised, the hero thought that, besides magicians, there might be other students in the tower. In fact, everything turned out to be much more complicated than it seemed, and there's a system of distribution by levels. In the tower, members are divided into 3 categories: the mage, the mage's apprentice, and the mage's assistant. Before Sean appeared in M.O. Long's magic tower, there were only 5 magician disciples. All of them had outstanding magic talent, and M.O. Long accepted them as disciples. And over time, they would have the opportunity to become official magicians, admired by people, and people like him were chosen by the magician M.O. Long as assistants. Although assistants have magical talent, it is usually not that high, and so they become assistants that official magicians do not pay attention to, and assistants only have 2 options. The first is to give up studying magic and try yourself in another profession, and the second option is to stay, and although many give up, most retain hope and the desire to master magic and become official magicians. And of course, among the assistants of those who realize their dream, there are very few. All the helpers live in the forest surrounding the magic tower. There is little first-level magic and basic techniques for cultivating strength and mental spirit in the forest, and this was not surprising to Sean. So at the very beginning, M.O. Long suggested that he live in the forest. Almost all helpers cannot accept failure when they reach the 7th level of helper, and after mastering a first-level magic spell, or perhaps 1 or 2 second-level magic spells, they leave the forest. But despite this, those who have mastered the second-level spell are considered magicians in the eyes of their people, and they have freedom and are actually the students of the magician, and they have the opportunity to try their luck. Whether it was in the army, mercenaries, or as adventurers, they would also be very popular and respected, and Danny congratulated Mr. Sean as he now became the 6th mage apprentice in the magic tower. This means that now he will have the opportunity to hire assistants. After thinking a little, the hero decided to find out what role the assistants of the magician students play, and it turned out that they serve him and help him in everyday affairs. They may also help prepare some simple magical materials, but essentially, assistants are just servants. Danny then explained that Mr. Sean, under his authority, could hire 2 assistants, and so he wanted to know if he knew anyone he would like to hire. This question really caught the hero off guard, and he was confused, not knowing who to choose. However, when Sean was going to choose someone to be his assistant, he was going to tell Danny about it. After some time, the hero sighed with relief because he finally became a student in the magic tower. But it turned out that even in the world of magic, there is a lot of injustice. Meanwhile, events were taking place in M.O. Long's room. The magician began to apply his magical abilities to an ordinary mirror. The space around him suddenly began to change. His body was surrounded by magic. Thus, he moved to another place using teleportation magic. All the mages began to greet M.O. Long, rejoicing at his appearance. Suddenly, M.O. Long shouted to Dawei that he wanted to talk to him. Dawei asked him to wait, as he knew he was coming, but he was currently conducting a magical experiment and couldn't talk. Realizing this person's character, M.O. Long understood that he was a maniacal researcher. Since Dawei didn't go to him, M.O. Long decided to go to him himself. Using movement magic, he easily approached his comrade's room. Through several magical steps, M.O. Long quickly reached his goal. Dawei was already running towards him, as he heard the guest approaching the entrance of the room. It turned out that the guest was Dawei, a 3-star magician, and his arrival was just in time. Sitting down at the negotiating table, they decided to try an unusual drink, milk tea, and M.O. Long expressed envy at Dawei, who had a servant who always sent him good things. As they tried the milk tea, they began to enjoy this wonderful drink. Dawei suddenly asked what M.O. Long was worried about. The man was angry, not understanding how Dawei could sense this, but it turned out that it was visible from his expression. The reason for the concern was that M.O. Long had accepted a disciple with very low magical talent. This news greatly shocked Dawei, since the boy's talent was extremely low, but he was still accepted as a student as if he were a relative. Remembering that Mo Long was an orphan, Dawei realized that he had said too much. Mo Long realized that he had to stop joking around, and he took the guy in despite his poor talent because the guy used a modified magic spell. These words shocked the experienced magician again, and he wanted to know what kind of magic spell was changed and used. It was a cutting spell that he called bullet magic, and it was much more powerful, breaking apart after hitting its target. Dawei immediately decided to find out where this guy studied, and upon learning that Sean was self-taught, he asked with interest what book he was studying. The man explained that he had previously been a craftsman and had used the book to repair his magical weapons. The guy only has enough magical power to cast a spell once, but he can use it instantly. If Mo Long hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed it either, and a 10-year-old child with poor magical talent was able to master magic at such a level. The insightful Dawei understood why Mo Long had come to him. The man needed advice on whether the new student would be able to learn this special type of magic. But Mo Long knew that with his talent, this guy seemed like the best choice. In any case, he should have thought about it carefully, because if he couldn't become a real magician, then studying this type of magic wouldn't help him at all. Mo Long sighed heavily and realized that the decision was now up to the boy. Meanwhile, Sean was wondering if he should tell Scott that he had become the apprentice of the magician Mo Long, or if someone had already told him. Suddenly, someone shouted for Sean to hurry up to the 9th floor. This message reached him through magical ability, even without his presence. Hurrying to the 9th floor, the hero thought about how interesting this form of magic was. Sean easily reached the 9th floor and informed the teacher that he was already there. It turned out that Mo Long wanted to introduce Sean to Dawei, his friend and a 3-star mage. Upon greeting, Sean introduced himself to the mage, expressing his gratitude for the opportunity to meet, and Dawei was surprised to find that the youth was so young. The magician remembered that Sean had already mastered the magic spell. After asking permission, Sean decided to demonstrate the spell to show off his skills. Sean used his magic, creating the effect of a bullet being fired. The magic beam was directed towards the point the hero was aiming at. Sean easily punched a hole in the table. Dawei watched, drawing conclusions about how the boy was using this spell. The magician was impressed and wanted to know if Sean knew any more spells. A little embarrassed, Sean admitted that he also knew the acid spell, but hadn't tried it yet and doubted he could now. It was surprising that his magical power was only enough for one spell, and yet there were few people who possessed such magic. In fact, there were quite a few such people, but Sean was unique. After thinking about it, the teacher asked his student not to worry about it, and Sean promised that he wouldn't. Since he became Mo Long's disciple, they had become a kind of family, and despite his poor talent, Sean was almost unable to release his magical power. Sean was prepared for the difficulties of the future, because using magic would be a real challenge for him. With a smile on his face, the teacher felt genuine joy as he realized how talented his student was. Mo Long looked at the youth carefully, trying to find out something important, and after all, there were many types of magic spells, and it was necessary to decide which one the youth would focus on. Unfortunately, the guy didn't have a deep understanding of magic, so he asked for a hint. The teacher, thinking, noted that Sean's magical talent was truly unusual. Apparently, he has excellent abilities in perception and an affinity with magic, a unique gift. It is thanks to these abilities that he will be able to easily master magic, even with low magical power, and in this he is truly lucky. This should be the basis for his magical abilities. Under the guidance of 2 teachers, he finally understood some aspects related to magic. For example, the power of magic spells depends on the magical energy used and is divided into 10 levels. Even with the same level of magic, the ratio of magical energy released may differ. The subtle difference at low magic levels becomes more noticeable after the magical energy level increases. High-level magic may require more magical energy, but it may be weaker than mid-level magic, and yet high-level magic cannot be compared to mid-level magic. According to M.O. Long, Sean should choose a spell that requires less magical energy to better suit his potential and future development. He lacked special learning abilities, but thanks to Alice and the virtual space, he had the opportunity to practice millions of times. Soon Sean decided to ask the teacher what type of magic he should study. Continuing his thoughts, M.O. Long advised him to study elemental summoning, coordinating it with Dawei. Among all types of magic, the power of elemental summoning was particularly impressive, while the consumption of magical energy was minimal. It was amazing, and the magic that required less energy was powerful, and Sean couldn't understand why other magics didn't choose this path. However, this type of magic had its own additional conditions. Elemental summoning had powerful power and low magical energy consumption, but at the same time, it was considered the most difficult type of magic in the world. Mastering elemental summoning magic requires a high level of learning ability on the part of the magician. Upon hearing this, Sean immediately asked the teacher if he had also studied the element summoning type. It turned out that the teacher had only little experience in studying this magic. The role of the protagonist's teacher was taken on by Dawei, who devoted many years to studying the spell of summoning the element. Even after he became an official mage of 1 star, he hid his ability to successfully use this spell from others. Sean, by asking questions, tried to find out how difficult the spell to summon the element was. Sean's question alarmed the teacher because he didn't understand why the boy had lost motivation despite his desire to try. The guy began to make excuses, declaring that he was not going to give up and intended to go all the way. The experienced teacher Dawei knew that Sean's talent was unique and he would definitely be able to master this spell. With a smile, Sean assured the teacher that he would not let them both down, but he realized that they had probably decided to let him learn the elemental summoning spell. Soon, M.O. Long brought all the magic books containing the foundations, basic information, and theory of elemental summoning magic. The boy, worried about the volume of books, thanked the teacher for the material provided. M.O. Long assured that elemental summoning magic offers many variations and is an exciting type of spell. Now Sean had to go to school, and if he had any problems, Dawei and M.O. Long would always help him. But the students should not rely too much on them, since they also have little knowledge about this kind of magic, and this was Dawei's recommendation. The teachers laughed and noted that this type of learning requires independence. Over time, the hero did not stop doing morning exercises and gradually completed the full complex for beginners. This allowed him to increase the amount of time he could devote to training his mental strength and elemental summoning spells. And suddenly, the hero found himself in a magic tower, becoming a magician's apprentice. A whole year had passed, and Sean was ready to show everyone what he had mastered during this time. Knocking on the teacher's office door, as he had been invited there in advance. Immediately after entering the hero's office, M.O. Long expressed a desire to check something important. Touching the boy's forehead, the teacher immediately determined that his mental strength was still quite weak, but the progress was noticeable almost twice as much as before. The hero was genuinely happy with these changes and thanked the teacher for his support, although it was worth noting that his improvement was the result of his own talents and hard training. Looking around to find the book she needed, M.O. Long decided to ask the guy how things were going with the elemental summoning spell. And it turned out that Sean was still studying it. But indeed, the magic of summoning the element turned out to be extremely complex and confusing. According to magical records, elemental summoning magic originated in ancient times. In that era, an alchemist who had reached a high level of magic initially researched mechanics and other techniques, and when he researched the structure of living beings, he failed to find the material he needed, so he decided to try another approach. He chose the magical element as the material for his research. The alchemist used powerful mental power of the spirit to compress the magic element, and the result was a material. However, due to the characteristics of the magic element, it had to be compressed in one go, otherwise an explosion would occur. The most difficult thing in elemental summoning magic is not the mental magical power, but the structure of the element itself that is being summoned. It had been a year since he had set foot on the path of the magic tower, and the theory of the elemental summoning spell had continued to bother him for a long time, and memorizing the layout was a tedious and painful process. The element call has its own feature, which is called compression. Even two low-rank magics, mixed and compressed, can be as powerful as high-rank magic. However, to fully remember the steps, actions, and details, as well as the realization and perfect release, requires a lot of effort and is an extremely difficult and troublesome task. It can be said that ordinary people generally will not dare to study this magic and focus on mastering it. Luckily, Sean is an unusual person because he has Alice, who can simplify and speed up the whole process. In the virtual space, when learning any kind of magic, there is no need to use mental power, which makes mastering magic nothing special for him, and there are no difficulties. Over the course of this year, having practiced magic many times under Alice's guidance, he had completely mastered this type of magic. Unknowingly, he had mastered 7 magic spells. All of them were first-tier magic, but if the teacher knew about his current level of mental strength and mastery, the entire magic world would be astonished. And among these 7 spells, the most powerful was the modified elemental summoning spell. It turned out that this spell was a summoning of an elemental bomb. Sometime later, Danny knocked on the hero's room, expressing a desire to enter. After apologizing for the disturbance, Danny seemed to have something important on his mind. The reason for its appearance was a letter. Suddenly, Sean realized that this letter was from Knight Scott. A year passed, and apparently something important happened that forced the knight to write this letter. After reading it, the guy was shocked by the content. Sean asked Danny to pass on any future letters from Knight Scott. It might be necessary to leave the tower temporarily, and for that, it was necessary to notify M.O. Long. The servant also handed him an unknown item to put on. The item turned out to be a magical identification plate, something like a token for their magical tower. As he left the tower, Sean reflected on how he had spent a whole year without leaving the magical tower. Looking into the distance, he saw Lewis's castle nearby. Using his new magical abilities, the hero moved forward easily and quickly. The clever young man was determined to help his comrade and was eager to get to him as soon as possible. The main character headed towards the castle with great speed. The people watching were amazed by his agility and assumed that he was a high-level warrior with a magic cloak. However, they realized that it must be a magician. Suddenly, Sean saw an obstacle in front of him and stopped instantly. Stopping running, he braked with force to stop in front of the obstacle. In a short time, he had already run to the entrance of Lewis's castle, where many people had gathered. The surprised residents turned their attention to the unusual guy, attracting his attention. The friendly inhabitants of the castle invited the magician to enter, showing respect for him. The people in the city were friendly and surprised that a magician had visited their city. Even the knight at the entrance was friendly and welcomed the newly arrived magician. A little nervous, the hero could not believe that magicians were so respected. Suddenly, he remembered that he had been in too much of a hurry and had forgotten to take money with him. The mages did not have to pay the city tax, and the guards let him through without paying. This was an impressive advantage for Sean, and he did not expect such an attitude toward magicians. Approaching a familiar bar, the hero was about to enter and greet his acquaintances. With the door open, Sean greeted Uncle Butler politely. The muscular man was glad to see the little mage back. Worried the young man decided to find out where Knight Scott was and discovered that he had been in the room upstairs for a week. Opening the door, my uncle exclaimed that Scott had guests. It was noticeable that the knight was in a bad state, having drunk a large amount of wine and was drunk. A young man appeared from behind the door, deciding to greet the man and visit him. This confused Scott, as he did not expect such an unexpected guest. The joyful man cried with emotion when he saw that Sean had decided to take care of him and come visit. The knight literally threw himself into his arms, as he missed the boy very much, and it turned out that the hero came immediately after reading the letter from the knight. The guy apologized for the delay in coming, but Scott still thought it was great and was thrilled that Sean was back. A caring relative decided to leave the old acquaintances alone, closing the door behind him, and their conversation concerned the attack on the young man by an unknown killer. The worried man was eager to get to the point, as he had challenged one of Count Robin Lin's nobles to a duel. Although they had already resolved this issue a year ago, it seems that he has given up on using the magic spell. In his opinion, he should have known that the magician's apprentice was living in his estate, and therefore he did not dare to act. However, last month he again began to create difficulties that were difficult for ordinary people to overcome. It turned out that Count Robin Lin had hired someone to threaten him and force him to hand over a magic spell. This fact really struck the young man, and he was eager to find out who had been hired to perform this task. Without thinking for long, the guy began to guess who could be this hired performer who committed such a terrible crime. At first, the worried man did not want to reveal this information, but then he realized that revelations were inevitable. Yet he did reveal that a magician's assistant was hired to commit the terrible crime. The witty young man quickly realized that Robin Lin's connections had helped him hire him, and he was curious about whether the mercenary had graduated. As expected, Sean guessed correctly, and it was said that this man had worked for 20 years under Creighton, a star-ranked mage, and despite his average talent and lack of prospects for advancement, Creighton, the mage, allowed him to complete his assistant training. Despite his status as a magician's assistant, this man had dedicated 20 years of his life to studying magic, which deserved respect. The hero was faced with the question of what Robin Lin was planning, and the guy even suggested that he could use magic to eliminate Knight Scott. However, it turned out that Lin had no intention of risking something so unpredictable, and his cunning plan was more cunning. The plan was to force the magician's assistant to conduct a magical duel against the main character. This fact shocked the unsuspecting guy, because he did not expect that such a thing would be spoken against him. Robin Lin planned to use a magic duel to determine who owned the magic spell. Suddenly, Butler became indignant, declaring that everything had already crossed the line, looking for a 20-year-old assistant magician to bully a 1-year-old apprentice magician. Scott was starting to think that the easiest thing to do would be to just give them the magic spell, keeping it to himself, and he couldn't provide him with protection, so giving it seemed like the best option. Everyone understood that the mage Tarini was almost like a god to their country, and the knight had to think carefully about his actions, because angering the great mage Tarini could lead to much more serious consequences. The knight, enraged, declared that he had no choice but to rely solely on Sean, even if he did not wish to put his future at risk. All this time the young man was silent, only listening to what they said about him. Scott tried to calm the boy down, assuring him that everything would be fine and he just needed to show up there. There was no need to fight since he would inform Count Robin Lin. Smiling, the young man asked Knight Scott, who said that he did not want to fight and that he would lose in this battle. Hearing this, the men were simply stunned, and they couldn't even imagine how an 11-year-old boy could defeat such an experienced magician. The determined boy exclaimed that he just needed to go and agree to a magical duel. The events took place the next day, when the heroes were not far from the estate of Count Robin Lin, who was already waiting for them inside. Robin Lin was glad to see Brother Scott and immediately noticed that the magician Sean was next to him. After bowing, the guests also greeted the Count, and this Count was known for his violent strength, but he turned out to be completely different from what the hero imagined. Meanwhile, the magician watched the hero, and the Count continued to talk with the knight, saying that they could come at any time, and there was no need to hurry. The hired magician turned out to be truly sinister, and his mental power was much stronger than Sean's. The good-natured Robin Lin introduced the magician D. Lin, who was about to fight in the duel. Feeling awkward, the magician greeted Mr. Sean and told him that he had finished Creighton's magic tower. The guy also greeted Mr. D. Lin and said that he had just entered the magic tower of the magician M.O. Long, becoming his disciple. Hearing this, the magician was shocked, and he did not expect that he would have to fight with the magician's apprentice. Noticing the mage's anxiety, Robin Lin asked what was wrong, and D. Lin explained that everything was fine. It was just that this young man had a higher status than him. The hero was really surprised by this and wanted to know why he thought so, and Dylan explained that Sean's position was much higher than his own. Soon they began to prepare for the duel, and the hero was determined, asking when the duel would begin. Suddenly, the worried magician said that he had a proposition for Mr. Sean. The guy laughed and wanted to know what offer they were going to make him. The proposal was to have a peaceful magical duel. When it became clear that the duel would be peaceful, the mages agreed to avoid serious injuries. The opponents glared at each other and then announced that the duel would begin. The evil D. Lin suggested that Sean start this duel first. This was not a problem for the boy. He understood that D. Lin probably wanted to test his true strength since he was really cunning. With a heavy sigh, the hero knew that despite possessing 7 first-level magics, with his current magical power, he could only use 3 spells. Because of this, it's better to use what he's best at. And of course, it was a bullet magic spell that could surprise any magician. A deadly magical beam was directed towards the target. With just one magical move, the protagonist managed to cut off the head of a wooden target. After the bullet's magic, a huge hole was left on the target, striking all spectators. It was a great result for the knight, and Sean showed off his bullet magic enhancement to great effect. Meanwhile, Robin Lin continued to watch the duel, not embarrassed by the fact that his opponent was so strong. This magic trick made the man think because it was really amazing. At the same time, D. Lin was confused and irritated. Turning to Mr. Sean, the boy asked if he had really only studied magic for a year, and the hero confirmed that this was the case. The friendly young man suggested that it was the turn of the magician D. Lin. Concentrating his magical energy in his hands, D. Lin tried to deliver a powerful blow. Immediately after that, he exploded, putting a lot of effort into using this technique. This time, during the duel, D. Lin used magic called Wind Sword. After a few seconds, the magic hit its target and the target began to tremble. The magic beam instantly cut off the wooden target's head. The audience also found this technique impressive and amazing. The second-tier magic, Wind Sword, was really powerful, stronger than bullet magic. However, the bullet magic was an instant magic attack, while the Wind Sword took several seconds to activate, and in a magic duel, Sean would be the winner. The hero was interested in how D. Lin would react to this fact. Without admitting defeat, the opponent declared that he considered the round a draw. Sean smiled and agreed with this, even though he knew that this wasn't really true. Still, they decided to have another round, but this time D. Lin was to attack first. Using the skills he had acquired over 20 years, the mage concentrated his energy to strike. For the hero, this was impressive because he had never seen the enemy work so hard before. The knight began to get irritated that his opponent had not yet shown his true strength. D. Lin began to shout loudly, releasing energy to make his strike even stronger. Flame magic was directed at the wooden target and it burst into flames. The impact was so powerful that Scott was shocked by the unexpected turn of events. A few seconds later, the target burned to the ground, leaving no trace. The sinister magician looked at the boy and laughed, saying that it was now time for Mr. Sean to demonstrate his skills. Without losing his composure, the hero said that now it was his turn to try. Concentrating the magic in his hand, he began to act, knowing that he had to win this duel. Thus, acid magic was used, and a massive cloud of mucus began to hover over the target. Immediately after that, the magical acidic substance enveloped the wooden target, pressing tightly against its surface. The acid, which can easily corrode wood, began to completely destroy the target. The magic demonstrated high efficiency, similar to the fire magic used by the enemy to destroy the target. Looking at his opponent, the hero noticed that the effect of the acid was not as powerful as he expected and decided to ask Mr. D. Lin for an opinion. The mage was alarmed as instant action magic was used again, this time acid magic with a long range and astonishing power. The young man decided to discuss the impressions of this blow with his opponent again. The worried guy suggested that this round could be considered a draw. The joyful hero expressed gratitude to the enemy for the decision he had made, which unexpectedly made him happy. Meanwhile, Knight Scott realized that Sean really did have great power, and it was unclear whether the Earl would be able to win. It was difficult to see any emotion on Robin Lin's face, as it was unclear whether he was happy or not. Therefore, D. Lin suggested that the main character hold another, third round. The hero sadly reported that his current mental magic power only allowed him to use 3 magic spells, and if the third round ended in a draw, he would have to use the magic core to restore his mental magic power. The opponent was shocked, but expressed gratitude to Sean for his honesty. So they decided to have one last duel, but the question remained of how to determine the winner. Suddenly, the enemy used the following technique using his magical powers. It turned out that it was the magic of the magic shield that protected the target. D. Lin suggested making the layer of magical protection an object and giving the hero the ability to use the magic core to restore magical power. If the hero manages to destroy the magic shield within 3 magic spells, it will be considered his victory, and for the enemy, a defeat. Smiling, the hero agreed to these conditions of the duel and was ready to accept the challenge. The experienced magician was completely perplexed, unable to comprehend how easily the main character agreed to such conditions. It turned out that the hero still had one last trump card, which he intended to use. Without any warning, D. Lin was shocked to discover that his opponent possessed such unexpected strength. It was hard for him to believe his eyes, because something incredible was happening. It was at that moment that Sean began to cast several magic spells at once. Indeed, this was what D. Lin had been thinking about, and he should have known about the ability to use multiple magic spells at the same time. That is why the magician was not ready for this and was prepared to lose the battle. Everyone present was shocked by the power of magic, and no one expected that an 11-year-old boy was capable of such a thing and was able to defeat an experienced magician. The spell used was called the Elemental Bomb Summoning Spell and was used to end the battle. After a powerful magical attack, a huge explosion was heard, creating fog, and no one could determine whether the hero had broken through the magical defense. The wave of destruction began to lift up all objects around the centers of the explosion, creating impressive chaos. As a result of this powerful explosion, a real rain of stones began in the air, rising from all sides. The Count anxiously tried to avoid the flying stones, feeling a slight fear that they might hit him. The brave knight instantly stepped in to protect Robin Lin, preventing any possible damage from the magic. The astonished observer could not believe his eyes when he saw how Scott acted as a protector from potential danger. Fortunately, everyone survived, and they followed the developments of the duel with interest. The explosion left a huge crater, replacing the areas where the soulless wooden targets had once stood. The effect of this magical phenomenon was impressive, and the hero could not help but admire it, while Lin was shocked by the unexpected turn of events. The enemy's fear was evident in his eyes as he realized that he had lost this fight. The kind-hearted boy extended his hand to his enemy, asking if he was okay. The smiling young man turned out to be stronger than the experienced magician, which caused the latter genuine surprise. The hero's kindness truly amazed the enemy, who could not believe his eyes. It was unimaginable to him because he could not understand how it happened. The protagonist opened Lin's eyes to the fighting technique of true magicians in duels. Even the Count couldn't help but applaud when the winner was chosen. Lin congratulated Mr. Sean on his victory and assured him that he would no longer have to worry about the safety of the estate. Turning around, the Earl also expressed his gratitude to Knight Scott for his protection, although he did it out of duty. Having such a noble landowner and a talented magician, the citizens could definitely feel very fortunate, Lin noted. Meanwhile, the main character continued to hold the magic crystal in his hands. He complained of being tired, although with his current mental strength he could have used another magic bomb, but he decided to feign tiredness. Still, the Count was deeply grateful to both magicians for demonstrating something amazing to him. After some time, the events continued in the tavern, continuing to captivate with their development. Upon the victor's arrival in the city, Butler was genuinely amazed at what he found next. The joyful knight and the young man greeted their old acquaintance cordially, sharing their delight at their return. Uncle couldn't hide his joy at Sean's safe return. It really impressed him. Sean actually won the fight, and the items behind them turned out to be gifts from the Count. The guy suggested that perhaps the Count had decided to settle the situation with their help, apparently trying to avoid conflict with such a powerful magician as Sean. Suddenly the men placed their fingers on the boy's lips, reminding him of the importance of restraint in expressing his thoughts. Meanwhile, Lin and Lin were carefully examining the crater left by the powerful explosion. The worried Count wanted to know from the magician what he thought about Sean's magical powers. The restless Lin recognized the great talent of the magician Sean and expressed the opinion that with diligent training for several years, he would be able to officially transform into a magician. However, the likelihood that this young sorcerer would grow into a real master was even higher. This is what prompted the magician to declare that it is better not to become an enemy of such people. After a short pause for reflection, the Count began to consider possible steps in this situation. This is due to the fact that he foresaw the possibility of the emergence of a strong competitor in the person of this young man, which in the future could bring many difficulties. The main character previously held a magic crystal in his hands. The magic crystal was a special artifact that could store magic as the power of the mental spirit. The origin of this crystal was not accidental, which implies the need to mention monsters in a magical world. Monsters have outstanding adaptability. Each of them has a unique and unrepeatable power. Often monsters have several skills designed to protect themselves. In the distant past, people with magical powers began to study the skills of monsters. After all, the skills of these creatures turn out to be much more powerful than those that belonged to people previously. Following the way the monsters performed their magic, they gradually developed innovations. Namely, enhanced magic appeared, the study of which became available to animals. Magic began to manifest itself, and those who possessed this art began to call themselves magicians. In the past, people used basic magic to help citizens. Thanks to the efforts of the magicians, life has become much better and easier. Thus, the magicians gained respect among the common people. They also went on journeys, exploring the world in search of new magical spells. Despite the abilities of monsters, which can be impressive, they still remain living creatures and can be destroyed. The meat of some monsters is suitable for human consumption. They are edible. Monster fur and skin can be effectively used to create magic scrolls. However, inside the monster's body, there is something even more valuable. We're talking about a magic crystal, or more precisely, a magic core. This magical core stores the energy that the monster accumulates throughout its life. And it is able to easily restore the mental strength of the spirit of the magician. Magical power is the mental power of the spirit, or, in other words, the power of the spirit of the soul. Perhaps this world was naturally supplied with this energy. Gradually, the mages split up, forming a new species called the Tamer, and the Tamers put in their best efforts and eventually tamed several monsters with friendly personalities, turning them into pets that gradually became domesticated. These monsters, raised by humans, have lost their original wildness and have become ideal companions for human life. Although the occupation of breeding and raising monsters cannot be fully compared to their wild counterparts. However, the amount of crystals produced is significantly smaller in this practice, although they're created much faster, making this method especially popular among wizards. In this context, the protagonist seeks to save all the crystals he has received in the current month for the purpose of using them in the future. Half a year has passed since the magical duel with Lin took place. During this period, Sean trained hard, increasing both his physical and mental strength, and he also mastered a new form of magic. This is a magic that instantly creates bombs, and despite the fact that activating this spell resembles a bomb explosion, the spell itself can only be stored in a magic scroll. Compared to normal magic spells, this spell is more like a magic crafting process. The wizard can create magic arrays using various materials and store the magic in advance in a magic scroll for possible unexpected situations. However, Sean aims to imprint on the scroll a magical spell to summon an element, which requires a special magical crystal material. Despite his patience, he tried to do this many times, but so far he was unable to imprint such a serious spell on the scroll. With the use of many magic crystals, progress gradually began to increase and experiments continued. Suddenly, the scroll glowed with a bright red light, indicating that the process had been successfully completed. Although the magic scroll can instantly summon a bomb, it requires 4 magic crystals, which doesn't seem very profitable. At that very moment, the main character heard something unusual and was amazed by the amazing event. It turned out that he was simply called up to the 9th floor. As he climbed, he thought about how the room on the 9th floor was a place where teachers demonstrated important knowledge and taught students, and it had been 3 months since he had last met the teachers, and their appearance was probably to check on his progress. Within seconds, the devoted student found himself in front of 2 teachers who greeted him. Long was interested in how much time had passed since he appeared in the magic tower, and Sean replied that it had been 2.5 years. Looking at the boy, the teacher was curious about how many magic spells he had already mastered. The hero knew only 6 spells, and the instant bomb was also in his arsenal, although it was not considered a full-fledged magic spell. Impressed by his magical power, the teachers were amazed by the incredible speed of his progress, and that is why they were curious to know which of the spells he had mastered was the most powerful. After a moment's thought, Sean guessed that it must be a spell to summon an elemental bomb. The stunned teacher could not believe his student, because even he himself was not familiar with such a spell. The men simply could not listen to his words, since they had no idea that such a spell existed and where the guy could have learned it from. Sean smiled and explained that the spell to summon an elemental bomb was written in a book of elemental summoning magic, and he learned it from there. These words shocked Dawei even more, as he couldn't believe that anyone could master something like this. Looking at Mo Long, Dawei decided to ask him why he didn't care about his student's success, and the man replied that Sean preferred to study on his own. Suddenly, the teacher decided to ask the boy if he had learned this spell a year and a half ago. This assumption really surprised the young man, because he did not understand how the teacher could know this about him. It turned out that Mo Long was aware of the magical duel that happened a year and a half ago with Creighton's disciple. The young man was troubled by the thought of a possible ban on magical duels outside of public view, and especially since he did not dare to report the duel he had conducted, fearing irritation from his teacher. Ever since Creighton had been regularly irritated when he saw Mo Long, he had always wondered about the reason for this hostility, and this question had been tormenting him until yesterday, when after drinking too much magic essence, he had finally revealed the truth to him. Joy entered the teacher, who knew that his student had never let him down, and who expressed his praise to him. With Sean's magical abilities confirmed, they decided to move on to the key topic of conversation. Considering that Sean had only been in the Magic Tower for 2.5 years, yet he had shown such great progress with his unique talent, he was asked to study 4 second-tier magic spell books, and these books were specially selected by Dawei and Mo Long for him to learn. The young man, feeling a little anxious, was quite impressed that he had been entrusted with learning the more complex second-level spells. Now he had the opportunity to start studying these books in his free time, which was an excellent prospect for improving his magical skills. This opportunity gave him a chance to raise his level in the magical arts. If Sean had no questions, he was invited to continue on his way, as the teachers were looking forward to his continued success. As Sean walked out of the office, he was truly impressed by everything he had just heard and learned. He sighed heavily, realizing that, as expected, his position as a disciple had not yet gained the necessary status in their eyes. It had been 2 years, and Mage Mo Long had still not given him any advice or allowed him to interact with other disciples, and perhaps his view of him was more like that of an experimental subject. But for the main character, this remained secondary, since his main goal was to become stronger. At this time, the teachers were discussing whether Sean had been given the second-level magic books too early. This moment seemed perfect because if Mo Long saw him as a suitable disciple, it was worth trying to unravel the secrets of magic. Dawei noticed that Mo Long had great hopes for him. And it was true, he was the most talented student they had ever seen, and despite his weak starting point, his growth in mental strength surpassed that of the average student, which was truly astounding. But the teachers were still concerned about the real reason for the student's rapid progress. However, the restless Mo Long was still unable to discover the hidden cause. Usually the hero would do strange exercises and then go to sleep, and the teacher would not have time to monitor his students' every step. Despite the high potential of many of the disciples, even a legendary saint-ranked mage had no guarantee that he would be able to unravel the secret of this rapid progress. Sean may have a weak base, but there may be something in his talent that they are missing, and it might be worth checking to see if he can master a second-tier magic spell with his current spirit power. Given his current mental fortitude, he can only cast 2 second-tier magic spells at most before he becomes exhausted, creating uncertainty as to whether he can master them, given that they are 4 different spells with different attributes. Mo Long didn't know the answer to this question, but he himself was able to master a first-level magic spell when he could only use it once a day, and perhaps Sean could repeat such an achievement. In any case, the teachers had to be careful, for they feared that the result might be a deep disappointment to them. It turned out that Mo Long was actually using the protagonist as an object for his experiment. In that case, Dawei was curious about what would happen if the guy was able to complete this task. In this context, Mo Long intended to share all his knowledge with his disciple. Mo Long's talent could only lead Sean to a 3-star mage at best, but if he could master it, then unlimited potential would open up before him, and if he could cultivate a strong mage, then he would have no regrets in his life. Meanwhile, the main character entered his room and began to study the magic books. At first, he planned to use his mental powers of spirit to decipher the magical symbols. After that, having memorized these symbols, he intended to enter the virtual space. Alice was amazed by this, realizing that the hero had received a new magic book at his disposal. Indeed, it was a second-level magic book. Having shown interest, the girl immediately felt the desire to study its contents. Gradually analyzing the book, the artificial intelligence tried to determine how exactly it could be studied. And then Alice exclaimed, pointing out that, as expected from a second-level magic spell, things weren't that simple. Having raised the question, the system began to study the book, trying to identify suitable teaching methods for the protagonist. In fact, she also tried to explore the path of movement of magical energy. It turned out that this path of magical energy was truly gigantic in scale. At this stage, a map for learning a minor magic spell appeared before them. A previously unseen specimen was revealed to the hero, and his curiosity prompted him to learn the secrets of this magical spell. Unfortunately, even the artificial intelligence system did not have information on this issue and was unable to answer such a complex request. Sean felt confused and decided to ask Alice to analyze and find out the essence of this magic. After thinking for a while, Alice thought that this spell was related to the wind attribute, but she did not have exact information about its effects, and she assumed that, having understood the essence of this magic, the hero would be able to return to the real world and conduct experiments. With a heavy sigh, the protagonist realized that he had a difficult task ahead of him, and he would have to put in maximum effort. Initially, the girl decided to mark the starting point so that the hero could remember this path. With great effort, the boy began to study spells, and Alice eagerly awaited the results of his research. Events continued to unfold a few days later when Danny came to Sean to invite him to dinner. The good-natured assistant sincerely wanted to help the hero reach the heights in the world of magic, and Sean was grateful to him for his regular support. As an experienced assistant to the magician, such actions by Sean were quite expected. Suddenly, the servant noticed that Sean was eating his dinner too quickly and asked him to slow down. It turned out that the guy was in a hurry to start learning new magical practices as soon as possible. In just a few minutes, he had finished the entire portion of food. Thanking Danny, Sean hurried out of the dining room, asking his friend to clear away the dishes after him. During this time, the other guys in the dining room were watching Danny. Coming closer, they said that they heard the magician M.O. Long reprimand Sean. After all, they had never seen Sean interact with other students of the magician M.O. Long, and assumed that he had been accepted due to his connections with influential people. The evil guys did not miss the opportunity to make fun of the main character's assistant and began to laugh. Suddenly, Danny decided he couldn't stand it any longer and slammed the table hard. He responded with an angry look at his enemies, pointing out that it was none of their business and called on them to stop asking questions. The enemies were apparently surprised by such behavior, because they knew that Sean was usually very kind and polite. However, the villains continued to spread rumors that Sean was accepted here due to his connections and his arrogant behavior, and Danny, knowing the second-level magic spells, was stronger, and they began to leave the place. With a heavy sigh, the guy began to think about what was bothering him a lot. Specifically, Danny wanted to understand how hard Sean was studying. Night fell, and the guy decided to go to training. It was already late, but he had been actively training in magic spells for 2 days and was about to go to bed. And so, Danny discovered that there was someone in the training room. It turned out to be Sean, and it was amazing that he was studying at such a late hour. Using all his magical abilities, the boy trained in using the new spell. Using all his power, he aimed the second-tier spell at the target in order to train it as efficiently as possible. Instantly, the spell hit its target, and sparks of lightning sounded throughout the room. What Danny saw in such a short time impressed him greatly. This was because he couldn't imagine how the wind blade summoning spell could be mastered in such a short period of time. At that very second, the assistant decided to go to the guy to say hello to him. He also wanted to tell him that he didn't expect this, that the guy had already mastered the second-level wind magic blade. Looking at his hands, the boy was very glad that he finally learned the name of this spell, and Danny, very surprised, could not imagine how one could learn a spell and not know its name. In fact, the hero admitted that he had just learned this spell and had not yet fully understood its essence. Smiling, Danny was truly amazed, but he knew that this student was truly not an ordinary one. The next day, events continued, and Danny decided to bring Mo along some tea. Suddenly, the teacher turned his attention to his student and noticed something interesting. Specifically, he noticed that Danny looked tired and decided to find out what happened. The worried student apologized to the teacher, explaining that he had seen Sean practicing with the wind blade the night before, and he realized that 10 years had passed and Sean had only mastered 2 magic spells, which made him feel ashamed. Smiling, Mo Long admitted that Sean's talent may be ordinary, but his diligence and dedication to learning magic was impressive, and in 10 years, he had already mastered 2 second-tier magic spells. The teacher reassured the boy, telling him that he shouldn't worry, and promised to teach him another second-level magic spell next year. After hearing this, the assistant was shocked and thanked the teacher for his kindness. Still, the teacher was interested in something else, as Danny had seen Sean use the wind blade earlier. Indeed, that was the case, and from the way Sean masterfully performed the spell, it seemed like he had already mastered it to a high level. The teacher dismissed his assistant, telling him to go. The door closed, and the teacher thought about his student named Sean. It's only been a week since he was given the magic book, and he has already mastered the wind blade, making him a true genius. Sometime later, Sean himself came, as the teacher called him into the office. Looking closely at his disciple, Mo Long still wanted to make sure that the hero had truly mastered the wind blade. Frightened by such a question, the guy immediately began to claim that he had not done it. The teacher immediately cut off his lie, because Sean had successfully released the wind blade in the training room yesterday, and Mo Long already knew about it. Realizing his mistake, the hero began to explain that although he had freed him earlier, it was probably by accident, and it could not be considered that he had actually taken possession of him. In this case, the experienced magician wanted to find out what the hero had actually mastered. Having laughed, the clever student decided to demonstrate his best spells. The first spell was Wind Blade, which he had just recently learned. For the teacher, this was truly amazing because in just 1 week the guy was able to master 100. A new magic spell immediately followed, namely Bullet Magic, which had been successfully practiced for decades. The spectacle was truly impressive because the teacher did not remember anyone mastering this spell so masterfully. The sight was truly astounding, and Mo Long was filled with admiration because the spells were magnificent. This was exactly what was meant by complete mastery of spells, exclaimed the great magician Sean.